Welcome, everyone, to the second meeting of the Audit Subcommittee. Will Ms. Susie Young please call the roll?
Assemblywoman Dickman. Senator Dennis.
Here.
Senator Hammond.
Here.
Assemblywoman Miller.
Here.
Chair Hadigi.
Here. And Ms. Young, if you would note that we do have Ms. Dickman present. She is on Zoom. I believe she might have just had some trouble unmuting herself.
Oh, now I'm unmuted.
Okay.
Sorry.
Please note that all members are present and we have a quorum. I want to start by giving a special thanks to all the state agency representatives that are participating in the meeting today. We also welcome the representatives from the accounting firms that are in attendance today as part of agenda item number 5. A couple of important housekeeping items before we begin. For those individuals who are participating on Zoom, for members and presenters, it's important to note that the chat feature is only to be used for communication with BPS for technical assistance. Questions, links, or anything should not be provided in the chat. That should be made available on the record. So again, chat is only to be used for technical assistance with BPS. Before we begin, and for the benefit of the audience and those waiting to testify, we will have 2 periods for public comment, one at the beginning of the meeting and one at the end, and public comment can be made in 5 different manners. It can be made by being here in person in Las Vegas, in person in Carson City, by calling in to 1-669-900-6833 and entering this meeting's ID number, which is 865-0419-6143, followed by the #. You can also email your comments, mail them into the research division, and fax them in, and all of that information is provided on the agenda. For your information, under agenda item number 5, the awarding of the contract for the single audit, accounting firms that submitted proposals and state agency representatives will have an opportunity to make remarks during that agenda item, and that is when the committee members will have an opportunity to ask them questions. With this, I would like to move to our next agenda item, which is public comment. I will first start by welcoming anybody here in Las Vegas who would like to provide public comment. Okay, I will move to Carson City. Is there anyone in Carson City wishing to provide public comment?
Yes,
I think
Chair.
I see someone.
Hi.
Okay, perfect.
Ready? Good afternoon, Legislative Commission, the Audit Subcommittee. I'm Catherine Byrne, your State Controller. I'm here today to provide neutral public comment for item 5, awarding the contract for single audit for the state of Nevada for fiscal years 2022 through 2025. The impact of today's decision will affect the State Controller's Office for the next 4 years. It is the State Controller's Office that works directly with auditors to provide not only the financial statements and the statements that they will provide an audit on, but we provide the significant audit evidence or sufficient audit evidence for them to be able to express an opinion on these statements. We, the Controller's Office, as well as other agencies that manage or are considered management of these outside audits, work directly with the audit and their contract. The contract today is between the state of Nevada and LCB, but the management of these agencies will make the representations that the auditors need in order to complete their work and express that opinion. It is not an option for anybody to influence an audit or change an opinion. We're just not able to do that. That's seriously wrong. It would be, it's just not appropriate that committees and directors and other parties that are not management to comment on findings of audits. That's done directly with management. That's what I wanted to mention today to the committee. I trust the process, and I know that you will make the good decision. And our office will work directly with the auditors you choose. And as In the past, we will provide the professional services that are required so that the auditors do obtain their sufficient audit evidence. So that concludes my presentation to the Audit Committee, and if you have any questions, I'm here.
Thank you, Controller Byrne. Thank you. Is there anyone else in Carson City wishing to give a public comment? Okay, seeing none, BPS, can we please check the telephone line?
Thank you, Chair. The public line is open and working. However, there are no callers at this time.
Thank you, BPS. Okay, I would like to remind everyone there will be a second period for public comment at the end of today's meeting. We can move on to our next agenda item number 3, which is approval of the minutes for the meeting on March 22nd, 2022. Members, you should have received a copy of those meetings via email and with the hard copy that was mailed to you as well. Are there any questions, comments, or changes regarding the minutes? Okay, seeing none, I will take a motion to approve. So moved by our Senator Hammond and a second by Assemblywoman Miller. Any discussion on the motion? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Assemblywoman Dickman, if you could just raise your hand. Aye. Aye. Okay, motion carry. Oh, all those opposed, nay? Okay, seeing none, motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Okay, members, I would like to let you know, and those who are listening and watching, that we will be taking the agenda items out of order. I would like to start with agenda item number 5, which is the selection of the company for the single-wide state audit. So we will be starting with agenda item number 5, then moving back to the agenda item number 4. So awarding of the contract for a single audit for the state of Nevada for fiscal years 2022 through 2025. To present, we do have our legislative auditor, Dan Crossman, here in Las Vegas, as well as Ms. Tammy Getz, our audit supervisor, and Shannon Rydell, chief deputy legislative auditor, who are with us in Carson City. Once the audit division presents, we will then take the companies in alphabetical order today. So, Mr. Carr, are you going to be? Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. I appreciate it. I'll begin by just providing a high-level overview for the members of the subcommittee of the process, and then turn it over to Ms. Getz. The state of Nevada's single audit is an audit of the state's financial statements and federal awards. The single audit is important to provide the public with assurance that the state's financial statements are presented fairly and consistent with government auditing standards. Additionally, it provides assurances that the state is following federal requirements while utilizing the federal funds within the state's agencies. The audit is conducted under the guidance of the Federal Office of Management and Businesses Title II, U.S. Code of Federal Regs, Uniform Administrative Requirements, Cost Principles, and Audit Requirements for Federal Awards, or Uniform Guidance. The state's financial statements are prepared by the Office of the State Controller and are included in the state's annual comprehensive financial report. The auditor issues an opinion on the state's compliance with internal controls over financial reporting and reports on material weaknesses or noncompliance with federal reporting laws, regulations, contracts, or grants. Additionally, the auditor reviews the state's compliance with applicable requirements for each major program and internal controls over compliance in accordance with uniform guidance. For purposes of familiarity, we'll refer to the audit as the statewide single audit under uniform guidance, or single audit. The Audit Division's responsibilities over the single audit are detailed in NRS 218G. These statutes require the legislative auditor to maintain a list of qualified firms that are willing to perform the single audit. To ensure equal opportunity for any qualified firm or firms to participate in the single audit, we obtain a listing of all firms registered with the Nevada State Board of Accountancy and invite all to participate in the RFP process. The single audit report is required by law to ensure the state continues to receive federal funds. In fiscal year 2020, the amount of Nevada's expenditures of federal funds was over $11 billion. In most states, legislative auditors have the pleasure of conducting these audits. However, in Nevada, the single audit has been contracted out for almost 3 decades. My office's expertise is in conducting performance audits, which are significantly different than a single audit. We do not currently have the experience or expertise to conduct a statewide single audit, and we do truly appreciate that there are highly qualified firms out there that are willing to apply their expertise and perform this work for the state of Nevada. The single audit of the state under uniform guidance has seen changes in the last few years. Specifically, the state continues to grow, and with that comes additional federal funds, with additional audit requirements attached. The federal government also continues to adjust the audit requirements associated with federal funds, and additional GASB statements and requirements increase the workload on the state as well as auditors. While all firms included in the RFP are well-established firms with significant resources and reputations, as detailed in our scoring, there are some differences in their specific qualifications related to this specific project. The technical proposals and related requirements is a critical area in evaluating a firm for performing this type of work. Specific experience and knowledge of state single audits is critical and important to ensure the project can be completed as efficiently and effectively as possible. Our staff have taken extensive measures to help ensure open competition and to receive proposals from qualified firms for the Audit Subcommittee to select from. Information relating to the evaluation of proposals and the firm's proposals are included in the packet, which you have in front of you. The results of our process are 5 firms we present today for your consideration. At this point, I'd turn some time over to Tammy Getz, who's an Audit Supervisor and the Single Audit Coordinator for the Audit Division, to provide some additional remarks regarding our process.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the Audit Subcommittee. For the record, my name is Tammy Getz, Audit Supervisor. I will begin by providing an overview of the request for proposal process. Our process for identifying qualified firms to present to the subcommittee did not change significantly from the last RFP issued in 2018. Over the years, the Audit Division has performed research on contract procurement methods, best practices, and identified topics relevant to the single audit. We have solicited and reviewed information from other states that contract for all or a portion of their single audit services. We also reviewed requests for proposals, different methods, evaluations, and documentation from other states to understand better their processes in awarding of their single audit contract. The authoritative guidance we reviewed encouraged broad-based solicitation of bidders to obtain the highest number of and most competent bids at a competitive price. Our request for proposals timeline was as follows. In December 2021, we sent an email to all accounting firms registered with the Nevada State Board of Accountancy, notifying them that we would be issuing an RFP for the statewide Uniform Guidance Single Audit. On January the 10th, 2022, we notified all 772 registered public accounting firms of the RFP's issuance and provided them a link to the RFP, which was available on the LCB website. As part of the RFP process, we accepted written questions until February the 2nd and posted on the website all questions and answers on February the 7th. All proposals were due to the legislative auditor on February 28th. The RFP required that firms submit 2 proposals, one beginning a detailed technical proposal including the firm's qualifications and descriptions on how they would complete the audit. Second, a separate cost proposal including their price for the 4-year term. Technical proposals were received through email, while the cost proposals were required to be sealed and submitted separately to the legislative auditor. When evaluating proposals, the firms are initially analyzed to determine whether they meet certain minimum qualifications. These qualifications include license to engage in public accounting, meets the independent standards of the Government Accountability Office, any discipline by Nevada State Board of Accountancy and other states' accounting boards, pass rating on most recent peer review, complies with technical and cost proposal requirements, and favorable opinion by references. Next, we reviewed and scored each firm's technical proposals. 4 of the Audit Division staff independently performed this evaluation. The technical proposals were scored in 4 weighted areas that included firm qualifications at 10%, staff qualifications at 25%, governmental auditing experience at 15%, and technical approach at 20%. For firm qualifications, this area is an evaluation of the capabilities of the firm, including its knowledge regarding applicable standards, the project, and staffing resources. The review also considers a firm's plan to satisfy the project requirements and required timelines, especially if its office and staff are not located in the state. Under staff qualifications, this area is a review of the staff assigned to the project in the proposal, including an evaluation of staff and project manager experience related to governmental auditing, training received by staff regarding governmental accounting and auditing, and a review of the hours stated in the proposal, including the proposed allocation of hours between staff and management. For governmental auditing experience, this area involves an evaluation of the firm's experience performing financial statement compliance engagements for governmental entities. The review includes evaluating the firm's experience with entities similar to the state, size and nature of other governmental engagements, and experience auditing annual comprehensive financial reports and performing compliance engagements. And under technical approach, this area involves a review of the firm's descriptions regarding the procedures to be performed, timeframes, and methods necessary to perform the engagement in relation to the RFP. In addition, the technical approach includes an evaluation of the contractor's understanding of certain requirements, including conducting exit conferences, obtaining agency responses, and notifying the legislative auditor of significant events. Our technical scores were calculated and finalized. The cost proposals were opened and incorporated into the overall scores. The scoring was based on a 100-point scale, the results of which are detailed in the proposal evaluation summary included in your packet under tab 5 on the second page. The proposal evaluation summary shows proposals were received from 5 firms: BDO USA, Clifton Larson Allen, Crowe, Eide Bailly, and Moss Adams. We also have provided for you in the evaluation summary each firm's estimated number of hours anticipated to complete the audit each year, as well as their annual contract costs. The proposals from each firm are included in your packet under tab 5. The technical proposals are followed by the cost proposals. These firms demonstrated sufficient expertise to be considered qualified to perform the single audit. However, based on the proposals, certain firms scored higher than others. The evaluation summary shows technical proposals were reviewed in the 4 areas with different weights applied based on the significance of the area. The technical evaluation, the staff's qualifications, and the technical approach to the audit had the most weight. Also important was the firm's governmental auditing experience and its capability to complete the single audit. The cost proposal was incorporated at 25% of the overall score and 5% for projected audit hours. Based on our technical evaluations, the 2 firms which received the highest scores are Eide Bailly and Clifton Larson Allen. When including the cost proposals, the firms Eide Bailly and Clifton Larson Allen also received the overall highest scores. Eide Bailly received an overall score of 85.62 and Clifton Larson Allen a score of 84.35. I would be happy to answer any questions. It is my understanding that representatives from 4 of the 5 firms are present today and available to answer any questions as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Getz. I am going to open it up to the committee before I ask questions. Committee members, we'll start with Assemblymember Miller.
Thank you, Chair Housekeeping. One question I have, Ms. Getz, is I want to make sure that I heard you correctly, that I know that you stated that you sent out information or the RFPs to over 700 companies. However, that there were only 5 proposals. And did I hear you say that that's because only 5 agencies responded with a proposal and not that this was, you just evaluated it down to 5? Did I hear that correctly?
Chair, through you to Assemblywoman Miller.
Feel free to go directly to the members, Ms. Getz.
Okay, thank you. Assemblywoman Miller, yes, we did issue the RFP out to 772 firms, and 5 firms responded to that RFP.
Follow-up, Chair? That seems like a very small amount, and I understand there's a lot of work that goes into it, and it's based on schedule and agency capacity and everything. But was there any concerns with that, to only receive 5 back from 777, or is that pretty typical when it comes to this line of work?
Assemblywoman Miller, for the record, this is Tammy Getz, Audit Supervisor. There is a limited group of large accounting firms that are interested in this type of work. It's a large, complex project requiring staff with the technical expertise in state financials and single audit compliance work. So we have reached out to as many firms as we could, and we have 5 qualified firms proposing to perform Nevada single audit.
Thank you so much.
I'm going to jump in and just ask a follow-up to Assemblymember Miller's. Is this what's been pretty like status quo? Is this what was received in 2018 as well?
Chair, for the record, this is Tammy Getz, Audit Supervisor. Yes, the prior year we also, actually 2018 in the prior contract, we also received 5 proposals.
I'm going to go to Senator Dennis next.
Thank you. As I looked at these, one of the questions that came to my mind was, did we change any requirements this time? Is there any like additional GASB requirements or other things that we have changed as far as what we've done in the past?
Senator Mo Dennis, for the record, this is Tammy Getz, Audit Supervisor. Our RFP process hasn't changed from the prior contract period. There has been new GASB pronouncements, and they do come out on an annual basis. And all the 5 firms in their proposals, they've addressed how those proposals and some of the future pronouncements are going to affect their proposals and their cost.
Well, and the reason I asked that question is because as I looked at the different proposals, it seemed like what we've paid in the past has gone up significantly, especially in some of the RFPs. So I'm just wondering if something has changed that would cause it to go up that way.
Sure, go ahead.
Senator Dennis, for the record, this is Shannon Rydell. I'm the Chief Deputy Legislative Auditor. So over the past few cycles, I think the big difference is the number of programs that have to be audited in the single audit. I think, 8-10 years ago, it was probably more like 12 or 13. Now I think it's up to like 18 programs. Sorry. And now it's up to like...
Say that again.
I think around 8 to 10 years ago, it might have been around 12 to 13 federal programs that they had to audit every year, and now it's up to like 17 or 18 programs, so that affects the cost significantly. I also think, as Ms. Getz said, the new pronouncements coming out are affecting the price fairly significantly in the next term. I think there's a new pronouncement on leases that's going into effect that's creating some additional work. So that is a factor in that as well.
Great, thank you. And if I could just have an additional question. So how long have we had the current auditor?
Senator Mo Dennis, this is Tammy Getz, Audit Supervisor. Eide Bailey's been performing the single audit for over 28 years. Eide Bailey acquired Kafori Armstrong in December 2014, and Kafori had performed the single audit since 1994.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you. That actually leads me to a question, but I'm going to check with our other members. Assemblymember Dickman, do you have any questions?
No, Senator Dennis asked my question, so thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, Ms. Getz, bear with me. I do have a series of questions that I'd like to ask. A lot of them I was able to find online, but I still want to make sure I put them on the record. So just following Senator Dennis's question, you had mentioned that the current company has been with us for 28 years. Do you think, and it's going to be a 2-part question, but do you think it would anticipate greater hardship to our state agencies or to the state to change the company, or do you foresee it maybe being a benefit and having someone fresh to come in? I'm not sure if you can answer that, but I mean, if you could just give us some insight into what you think. I'm sitting on Interim Finance Committee, sitting on Ledge Commission, chairing Commerce and Labor, and this. One of the things I see consistently brought up in all of our committees is how understaffed all of our state agencies are. It's a common just answer that we get, that they have vacancies that they can't fill, and I think statewide it's like 30% vacancies or 32% vacancies across all of our agencies. And so I'm trying to think about what kind of hardship having a new company come in that's not familiar with our agencies, or whether that would be a benefit, having someone with fresh look come in, or whether it would be more of a burden to the system as it currently is.
Chair, this is Tammy Getz, Audit Supervisor. I'll actually break that down into a couple parts. First, for state agencies, there will certainly most likely be an impact to the agency staff and their operations during the first few years of the contract, as the new auditors are gaining an understanding of the agency and becoming familiar with their processes. The Government Accountability Office states that it takes 2 to 3 years or more to become sufficiently familiar with auditees' operations and their processes. As the firms are required to work with various agencies of the state, there is undoubtedly a lot to learn and understand about the state, its operations, and the controls surrounding these processes. Now, going into taking a new look into the single audit, in short, that is a very hard question to answer, but we have researched that. Let's start with, is there a requirement for rotating firms? Our review of various sources of authoritative accounting guidance has shown that there is no requirement for auditor rotation of statewide single audits. Further, there is no definitive benefit to implementing a mandatory rotation. Both the American Institute of Certified Public Accountants and the Government Accountability Office have drawn similar conclusions that mandatory rotation is not a more efficient solution to improving auditor independence and audit quality. Proponents of firm rotations suggest that it provides a fresh look at the auditee's operations, may increase independence, and may increase objectivity and professional skepticism, while opponents of firm rotation suggest audit failure is the highest in the early years of a newly engaged auditor. It's easier to mislead new auditors who aren't as familiar with the auditee and its operations, and it requires the new auditor more time to get up to speed. Does that answer your question completely?
Yes, thank you. And that brings up another question. Do you know how many states have used the same practice where they've had the same firm for at least a few decades? Is it pretty common for states to do this?
Chair, this is Tammy Getz, Audit Supervisor. For 2021, 13 other states have contracted with an accounting firm to perform all or a part of their single audit.
Okay, and that was actually my next question. How many states actually contract an outside firm? But of those 13 states, do they normally stick with the same company, or is there rotation with the other states? Do you know?
Chair, this is Tammy Getz, Audit Supervisor. From the states that we have talked to, they tend to stay sometimes with the same. It kind of varies from state to state. Some will tend to stay. Some states that we have spoken with, they do have a policy that they do need to rotate after so many years. So again, it's dependent upon the state.
Okay, thank you. And I do have one more question for you. I was able to find how many hours were spent on the 2020 single audit, and it was right over 6,300. Do you know about how many hours will be spent on the 2021 audit?
Chair, this is Tammy Getz, Audit Supervisor. Actually, as of the end of March, there was 6,063 hours spent on the FY21 audit. There are still 2 more months pending that audit, so there will be some additional hours charged above that.
So will we be around the 6,300 hour mark as well then, you think, or do you think it'll exceed that?
Probably
63.
Chair, this is Tammy Getz, Audit Supervisor. It may or may not go over that. However, I believe Ide Bailey's here today and might be able to give you a more definitive answer on those hours.
6,063.
Yes.
Perfect, thank you. I am going to do a final round of questions for, okay, I'm going to go to Assemblymember Miller.
Thank you, Chair. My question is, how many of the firms that did submit a proposal, it looks like from what I can tell from the proposals that maybe 2 companies are actually Nevada-based companies. And I was wondering if you could confirm that, if it was 1 or 2, and also if any preference in your scoring mechanism was given to Nevada-based companies.
Assemblywoman Miller, this is Tammy Getz, Audit Supervisor. None of the 5 firms are based in Nevada. However, 2 of the firms do have offices in Nevada that will be performing the single audit.
Thank you for that clarification, because it was from their letters that I was looking at the addresses. So can you tell us which 2 firms those are that do have at least offices here in Nevada? And like I said, I was just looking at the addresses from their letters.
Yes, Assemblywoman Miller, that would be Eide Bailey and BDO.
Okay.
And Assemblymember Miller, I believe our auditor, Mr. Crossman, can answer the part of your question regarding the preference on the...
If there was preference.
For the record, Dan Crossman, Legislative Auditor. Assemblywoman Miller, we did not have a specific item in the scoring that would factor in a preference for a Nevada-based firm. We did look at all the firms and their ability to perform the work from their location, and did provide that scoring may reflect whether or not they had their amount of time they were planning to be able to be on site. Things of that nature were incorporated into there, but there was not a specific factor that would provide extra scoring to a firm that had a Nevada-based office specifically, if that helps.
It does. Thank you so much.
I'm going to go to Senator Dennis next.
Just as I was looking through these, I'm just wondering if you did any kind of comparison on the partner and manager hours as a percentage of the total.
Senator Dennis, this is Tammy Getz, Audit Supervisor. Yes, this was incorporated into one of the scoring categories in the proposal scoring process. The single audit is a complex audit with many moving pieces. As Nevada has grown, agency programs have also grown with an increase in federal funding, resulting in additional compliance requirements. Technical expertise in these federal grant programs is imperative, so principal and manager involvement is important to ensure less experienced staff receive sufficient guidance to conduct the audit in an efficient manner. Our analysis of the 5 firms showed which firms committed the most senior staff to the project. From the proposals, Eide Bailey anticipates spending 46% of their total hours using principals and managers. BDO, Clifton Larson Allen, and Moss Adams indicated around 30%, and Crow stated about 19%.
Thank you.
Okay, and I do have one last question for you too, Ms. Getz, I'm sorry, and then we will let you go. But I had a question regarding the evaluation process. You guys had mentioned that when you guys requested you put out the RFP and people submitted it, you requested 2 separate RFPs. One technical proposal that was emailed, and then the second was the cost proposal that was sent in a sealed envelope that you guys didn't open until the technical proposal was completed. And so on the form, I can see where the first row, the technical evaluation was, and then we add in the cost proposal. But could you walk us through why you do that? Why both of them are evaluated separately?
Chair, this is Tammy Getz, Audit Supervisor. Yes, that's really important that we do try to keep our evaluation of the cost proposal separate from the technical. And all the 4 individuals within the audit division, they review the proposals independently, and then we do get together and combine those scores, and at that point, that's when we open up the cost proposals, all of us together. and then score the cost proposals separately.
Okay, members? No? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Crossman. Thank you, Ms. Getz, and thank you, Ms. Rydell, for being here with us and for that introduction and presentation. Thank you. Okay, committee members, at this time, we will now hear from the agencies. I'm going to take them in alphabetical order, so I will be starting with BDO USA first, and I believe we have Chris Farthing here to present it and take questions. Hi, thank you. Welcome. And make sure to hit the mic button when you are speaking, and then just if you want to hit that when you're done.
Thank you to the committee. It's a pleasure to be here today. And with me, I actually have Ryan Whitman. He's our office managing partner, and he'll kick us off with a couple comments, and then I'll take it from there.
Good afternoon. Thank you, Chris. As mentioned, I'm Ryan Whitman, the office managing partner of our Las Vegas and Reno offices for BDO. I'd like to thank you all for the opportunity to bid on the state of Nevada audit. As you may be aware, several of our Nevada partners here in BDO joined the firm from Piercy, Bowler, Taylor & Kern, who also had an extensive government practice and bid the state audit in prior years. We coupled that experience with the resources of BDO, being that BDO is a Global 5 firm with experience with local governments and large governments, both in advisory roles and in assurance. As mentioned in our proposal, some of our background and client list includes the U.S. Virgin Islands, as well as Washington, D.C. We also have smaller entities such as the City of Anchorage, City of Denver locally. In our tenure, we've audited the 5 largest cities in the state. Currently, we audit Washoe County and the City of Henderson. Taking that experience and coupling that with BDO's resources, our intent was to utilize that to provide the best and efficient audit possible to the state. And with that, I will turn it over to my partner, Chris, here, who served as the engagement partner on several of those engagements.
Thank you, Ryan. And again, my name is Chris Farthing, audit partner with BDO for the committee. It's a pleasure to be here today. As Ryan mentioned, I joined, he mentioned PBDK. I joined BDO from PBDK in July of 2020. I spent a couple of years there. Prior to that, I was an audit senior manager with one of the, quote, big 4 accounting firms in the U.S., audited a lot of large public companies. Most importantly, in recent years, I have served as a partner and a director on several of our large government clients here in Nevada, including Washoe County, the City of Henderson, City of North Las Vegas, and involvement in the City of Reno. I also serve as a technical reviewer or a secondary reviewer on several other large government clients throughout the region in BDO. In my time as both an auditor on non-government engagements and government engagements, I've seen a large range of engagements. At my prior firm, I was on one of the largest gaming clients in the state of Nevada, so I've seen large, very complex organizations and have experience working with very large, complex organizations. And now more recently, in the last 3 years, a lot of experience in government, specifically heavy focus on all of those. And I'm currently the signing engagement partner on both the City of Henderson and Washoe County, Nevada. Given my experience with that, I bring a lot of managerial experience on large projects, multiple teams working in multiple areas. I have extensive single audit experience, a large number of single audit programs on each of those. The city, or Washoe County, we had 6 major programs in the prior year. It's a lot smaller than the state of Nevada, but is still a very large number of single audits. So I just want to say thank you for your time and consideration. I think BDO brings a lot of technical expertise. While we do not do a lot of state audits specifically, we do audit the Washington, D.C., like Ryan mentioned, and the Virgin Islands. So we have access to those teams and their experience on large state audits. So thank you for your time, and we're happy to answer any questions on our proposal.
Thank you both for being here. I appreciate it. I'm sure we'll have, you guys get the hot seat. You guys get to answer the questions first, which will probably be similar questions for all of the agencies who are here. I'm going to go to the members first. Senator Hammond?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So you mentioned something earlier, actually it was mentioned about some of the differences between, and I guess this is a question, and I'm going to forget, is it Mr. Farley, is it?
Yes, Farthing.
Okay. It was mentioned the number of senior staff hours that would be necessary to do this, and I imagine what was put down in a proposal was what your estimation is. Of course, this to us is a priority. We really want to make sure this is done in a timely manner, done right. You mentioned different teams that are available to perform this audit. Would you commit that you would give additional hours, additional senior staff time to this project as you try to make sure the deadlines are made on time?
Yes, thank you, Senator Hammond. For the record, Chris Farthing, BDO. Yes, we would bring in additional resources as needed at all levels. So if the project goes over scope, we would not just assign junior level staff to complete all that work. It would be additional manager hours, partner and director hours, and we can pull from within the region to the extent needed if we can't serve the capacity within the state of Nevada. But we do have a large office here in Las Vegas and an office in Reno, so we believe we could staff it substantially out of Nevada with just the people that are mentioned in the proposal that are from other offices, including one audit director, Abby Hagerman from the city, from Denver.
That's it. Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
I actually want to follow up to Senator's question. Was that cost built into the proposal? Like if you need to pull in additional senior and management levels or pull in from your DC team, or would that be at an additional cost?
Thank you, Chair. For the record, Chris Farthing, BDO. Yes, that is all priced into the proposal. Any additional resources that we needed to pull in would be part of the original proposed price.
Thank you. Okay, I'm going to go to Senator Dennis.
So as I look at your bid, I'm looking at the cost, and you came in at like really high, and I'm just trying to understand your 30% is for management and partner, but I'm trying to understand what are the extra costs that cause yours to be that much higher, or what are you is it something you're anticipating different, or?
Thank you, Senator Dennis. For the record, Chris Farthing, BDO. Our proposal was based on our review of the 2020 annual comprehensive financial report and our discussions with multiple engagement teams in other areas, particularly the Washington, D.C. team and the number of single audit programs they do. We priced it based on the number of programs as well as the just number of major funds that are part of the state audit. And we went through and prepared a detailed budget by level, by area of what we thought it would take. And that's the total number of hours. I believe we came in at just over 7,300 hours. So that's the investment that we will make into it. And I believe that our rate per hour was competitive and actually not necessarily the highest, but right in the range of the other firms.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Assemblymember Dickman.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair. I just had a question about the number of hours. The total number of hours in this proposal is nearly double some of the others. And I'm just wondering what would cause that, and would that have an effect? I mean, it seems like maybe our Nevada people who will be working with you would have a lot more time of their time consumed than some of the other bids.
Thank you, Assemblywoman. For the record, Chris Farthing, BDO. I can't speak to the hours of the other firms, but I do stand behind our hour estimate of 7,360. I believe it's close to what the incumbent was spending and what is expected for the 2021 audit, slightly higher. As far as what other firms think they are or believe they can do from an efficiency perspective, I'll let them to speak to that. But I think that's the 7,300 is a reasonable estimate for what we believe it'll take to get in there and actually understand the state, do the audit, and complete a quality audit.
Thank you.
Any follow-up,
Chair.
Assembly Member?
No, I guess
Okay.
not. Thank you.
Okay, so I do have a series of questions, and they're probably going to be the same questions for every agency, but can you walk me through? I know that this 2021 the statewide single audit hasn't been completed yet because of the pandemic and other issues that have resulted in a delay. Did you take that into account? And if there is delays, did you guys, delays that come up, was that something that was taken into consideration when you guys were coming up with your price? And would there be any additional cost if there are delays or additional information that you that you need?
Thank you, Chair. For the record, Chris Farthing, BDO. We did consider the timing of the historical audit and the fact that it's been delayed outside of the normal process as part of our overall pricing. And our hours are based on what we think it would take based on the time period that the audit has occurred in over the past several years, including a lot of time in November, December, January, February. And our price is, as we've put in the fee proposal, a fixed fee.
So then there's no other circumstances that you would foresee that would cause you to come back and request additional funds?
There's nothing that I can see right now. Now, if there were extraordinary, unusual circumstances, for instance, the number of major programs ballooned well beyond what's in there, or something of that nature, or there was a complete change in major funds, then we would probably approach that and have a conversation with the legislative auditor. But there's nothing that I can anticipate at this point in time.
Okay, thank you. And I know this Assemblymember Miller asked one of my questions, but this was something that I was going to ask all of the firms. I know you guys are located here, so thank you for starting with that. But I know you've mentioned you have done other single audits, but never statewide single audits. Would this be your first time doing an entire state, something of this magnitude?
Thank you, Chair. For the record, Chris Farthing, BDO. Yes, this would be my first time doing an entire state. However, the major program, the single audit requirements come from the federal level, so they are the same regardless of the type of organization.
Okay, thank you. And how much time, what percentage of your time do you guys normally spend on site when you're doing single audits?
Thank you, Chair. Chris Farthing, for the record. Typically, when we're doing an audit of this nature, our time on site would be somewhere around 70 to 80%, if not more than that. We try to be on site as much as possible, and then with minimal work, planning, and reporting that can be done remotely without any incremental effort.
Thank you. And then did you contact any of our state agencies that you would be auditing for information or to answer any questions that you might have had?
Thank you, Chair. Chris Farthing, for the record. No, we did not do that. We were able to gather sufficient information, I believe, through the annual comprehensive financial report and various information on the website.
And then just one last question for me, but you did hear me stress earlier how what high percentage of vacancies we have in our state, and it's something that we hear from every single state agency. So can you walk us through what you would do to lessen the impact that our state workers would face or the state agencies would face if we brought in a new firm?
Thank you, Chair. For the record, Chris Farthing, BDO. One of the first steps in any new audit engagement as part of the client acceptance and preparing for the new audit is that you review the predecessor auditor's working papers, and that's standard practice in the industry. So we would start with that to gain an understanding of what has been done historically. And then everything else would just be around scheduling meetings and walkthroughs with heavy participation from engagement leadership. Especially in the first year, we would have heavy involvement from partners and managers, ensuring that the right questions are asked and that answers are received timely and appropriately, and we avoid additional rework and going back to the client multiple times.
Thank you, members. Any other? Senator Dennis?
Thank you. So, with the pandemic, everybody's having issues with staff and having staff turnover. Are you having that, and how would that impact any of the work that you might be doing?
Thank you, Senator. For the record, Chris Farthing, BDO. Yes, we have experienced turnover. It's an industry-wide occurrence right now. Every firm, I believe, as far as I know, is facing a turnover. It's something that we have dealt with historically. We can pull resources from the region. Being a large firm, we can pull resources as needed, and we just attempt to manage that through transition plans between staff when people do leave.
Great, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Members, last call. Thank you so much for being here. We appreciate your presentation and taking our questions.
Thank you, committee.
Okay, members, the next agency is Clifton Larson Allen. I believe we have Ms. Allison Slife, Mr. Paul Niedermuller, and Mr. John Amundsen here to present. Welcome when you're ready.
Thank you so much, Madam Chair and members of the subcommittee. We are really honored and feel privileged to be able to present to you all today. My name is Allison Slife, and I'm a principal with CLA for short, is our firm acronym there for Clifton Larson Allen. And I would be the overall engagement leader of the statewide single audit and also lead the specific work over the federal program piece of that. I'll let Paul introduce himself.
Thank you, Allison. And for the record, Paul Niedermuller with Clifton Larson Allen. And we are also joined by two of our Las Vegas partners, John Amundsen and Jim Main, who are sitting in the audience. We want to also point that out. And I will be doing the financial statement audit and supporting Allison in the question and answers. Allison.
Great. So to talk a little bit, certainly we want to introduce CLA to you all and talk about what we bring to the table for the state of Nevada, but also certainly we welcome the questions from the committee members and are excited to address any concerns or items you might have from our proposal. What I wanted to talk about specifically is what differentiates CLA coming here to the state of Nevada is that we are the top 10 firm and the #1 provider of financial audits and single audits of any state across the country. So I know that was discussed previously. We actually audit 9 of the 13 states that are contracted out for the statewide single audit. And so, why does that matter? What does that mean for the state of Nevada other than a statistic? We really think that that shows the breadth of our knowledge of states and state entities, what states are challenged with and faced with, especially with the impact of COVID and all of the pandemic impacts, among all the other things that are going on from a state perspective with the new accounting pronouncements that are always coming, but I know certainly with GASB 87 and the lease impact, it's something that we've been proactive with all of our state entities for years, knowing that it's been coming. It was delayed with the pandemic and now it's finally here. So really, why is that important to us? We really feel that that brings the best practices to the state of Nevada that we see in other states. Those include the states of New Jersey, states of Kansas, state of Pennsylvania, among those other 9 that are listed in the detailed transmittal letter of our proposal if you wanted to take a look at that more. But we understand every state is different, but there's certainly some nuances, especially as it relates to the areas of Nevada with the gaming focus that are similar to some of other states that we do perform the audits. On top of that, we also perform the most single audits across any firm across the country by far, and we do have a table within our proposal of that. And why is that so important? Again, the single audit related to the federal programs is extremely complex, ever-changing. I think it was talked about in a lot of the opening remarks, and it's something that really takes a special set of skills and understanding. The team that we propose within the proposal is 100% focused within the state and local government industry. It's something that we're passionate about. We don't work on other industries. We don't work in other services. We don't do taxes on the side, things like that. It's something that we're 100% involved with. Even from our very beginning staff that are hired out of school, they're passionate about governments. And so it's something that they're exposed to from day one, and that's shown in the number of single audits that we do perform across the country. Really what we're focused on also is providing an efficient audit, an effective audit, meeting all the quality standards and all the things that are certainly a given, if you will, from an audit perspective. But we want to be more than just an auditor to you all. We want to be a partner. We want to really have that collaboration. We want to have communication with members across all the state agencies, as well as you all from a subcommittee perspective to really understand the needs, the concerns, the questions that you want us as those external auditors to dive into, because there's a lot to be had during that kind of information gathering process. And so having communication, two-way communication with members of the Audit Subcommittee as well as members of all the key state agencies is something that we feel is really important and something that we'd want to have from day one, that we do have a proven track record, if you will, with our other states that really goes a long way. And so from a cost perspective, we do know it's an investment, to switch to another accounting firm, but we're committed to that. We have compared to our other statewide single audits that we perform and feel confident in the numbers that we did propose to the state. The last comment I wanted to also mention is just from a industry standpoint. Like I mentioned, we're really committed to the government industry. We're involved with NASDAQ. We are a sponsor. We're a speaker and a participant, if you will, from a larger state community, and that's something that we really value and bring to the table as well, those connections that we have across the country. We know that the relationship ultimately with the subcommittee is extremely important, and we take that seriously, and now would love to stand for any questions or comments that you might have from any members of the subcommittee.
Thank you so much for that. I am going to go to the members first, as always. I'll start with Senator Dennis.
Sure. I mean, I think you've just alluded to that. I mean, as I look at the hours, you mentioned that you think that the hours are appropriate. Even with you coming in new, there's some, I'm sure you have built in some time for that. But, your hours are less than others. And so let's talk a little bit more about that.
Sure. Yeah, no, great question. Thank you, Senator. Really it comes from the experience from working with those 9 other states. The hours are an estimate based on the facts and circumstances that we know, but we feel confident in those based on our detailed, hours estimate by level, by area, based on that, knowing what the state has going on, knowing that the 2021 audit results are not public yet in terms of, being able to see that, but based on all the facts and circumstances, we feel confident in that. And I will say also, somewhat related to maybe your question, is that this is our 3rd time at the table in presenting and wanting to be a partner to the state of Nevada. And over those years, over those cycles, we've really tried to understand the state as best we can. We've met with the state controller. We've talked to different members, outside of the RFP periods over the many years that has passed. And so we feel like we've gotten a good, solid foundation from the start, but we certainly understand year one is an investment on both sides and are committed to that and certainly, welcome any follow-up question to that.
Great. And then I'll just go ahead and ask the other question that I asked previously on the turnover. Talk a little bit about how that's impacted you and how that would impact the audit.
Sure. No, similar to the previous members of BDO, we certainly do have turnover and are not immune to the Great Resignation, as talked about quite a bit. I think maybe a difference between our firm and other firms is that we hire directly into our government practice. So our folks are working with governmental clients, which in terms of year ends, the cyclical nature, if you will, is a bit more like a wave versus a peak and valley that a lot of other firms have with tax focus, kind of right in the January through April is, crazy hours. I think something that helps from a retention standpoint and a selling standpoint is that we smooth that out a bit based on our client loads. And so we feel really passionate about that and something that's really a maybe selling point, if you will, as we're hiring and retaining our folks that I know, from me starting with CLA many years ago was a great aspect to that process. But certainly, if there's turnover, things like that, your core team is always there to support that and support that transition that happens behind the scenes and try to minimize that impact to the state.
Great. Thank you. Mm-hmm. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Members? Senator?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Same question probably that I gave to the last firm, but slightly different. You have some experience. You've done this in 9 other states. Any chance that any time that you've actually been late in submitting any of the requirements, submitting any of the reports on, were you late at all, or is it the same thing where as you get close to a deadline, you commit extra resources to make sure you're on time?
Yeah, no, I appreciate the question. And certainly things happen and we understand that, but I think from day one, setting that timeline with, all the key stakeholders from the state is really important to be able to address that from day one. We know that there's been some delays, recently for the state of Nevada and built around that. And I will mention from a cost standpoint, we have not changed our hourly rate estimate at all to address that, regardless of when the work needs to go. We're committed to our fee and our cost proposal. So we understand that, there's a lot of different circumstances that happen, but that's certainly something we'd want to know going into it and have that conversation. But we have, over 400 folks across the country that work on governments. And so we do have a large pool of resources if there was some sort of, peak in making sure that we hit that deadline. But just the overall takeaway, I would say, is the communication about that, making sure there's no surprises all around to address any of those. Thank you.
Thank you. And okay, Assemblymember Dickman, do you have any questions? Okay, now I do have a series of questions, and they're going to be along the same lines as the questions we had asked BDO. But I just want to touch back on what Senator Dennis had mentioned. So your proposal came in with 5,700 hours, and knowing that in 2020 it was over 6,300, and knowing the delays that have happened in 2021, and it's probably going to be over on the 6,300, you guys still feel confident that within your first year of getting to know a new state, you can do the single audit in 5,700 hours, which is significantly less than what has been the last 2 years at the cost that you're proposing?
We do feel confident in that. And again, we're assuming a lot of things going into that, based on all the facts and circumstances that we know at this point. But we do feel like, from being a national firm, we have a lot of efficiencies we've been able to go through with that as it relates to, a lot of times where time is spent is setting up testing work papers and researching new rules and new guidance. And we have a whole, team, if you will, behind us that supports us from a technical standpoint. And so we're able to kind of go right to the source, if you will, a lot of folks that are involved with GASB, with the Governmental Accounting Standards Board, NASDAQ I mentioned, a lot of key players from a federal agency perspective. And I think that can sometimes maybe cut down on some of that additional time that it takes to research, complex situations. So we do feel confident in that and understand that it is an investment all around.
Okay, and financial resources to the state are important, so I just want to make sure I'm getting this right now on the record. So you guys have taken into account the delays and an extended timeline possibly, and have worked that into the fixed cost, and you don't foresee any delays or anything else coming up that would cause you to come and request more funds from the state?
Correct. Yeah. With all the facts and circumstances at this point, I agree with what you just said. Yes. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, now I do have some other questions to ask. Now, you had mentioned that you have 2 Nevada members here. Do you guys have an office here in Nevada? You guys have an office? How many Nevadans do you employ? I think one of the things that a lot of me and my colleagues share is that when we're using Nevada dollars, we want to make sure we're putting Nevadans to work. So how many Nevadans do you have here in state working for your company?
You want to speak to that, Paul?
If it's okay, I'm going to bring up our colleagues to address that question.
Good afternoon. I'm from the Las Vegas office, been here since 1983, and we have 44 members currently, full-time, here in Las Vegas. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate you joining us. Okay, and you had mentioned that you currently do 9 of the 13 states that hire an outside agency to do their statewide single audit. The team that you're dedicating to Nevada, how many other states would they also be auditing?
There we go. Sorry about that. Allison Slave with CLA for the record again. So it's myself and Paul as the lead principals on the engagement, and we currently serve the state of Kansas, and that's the only one that we serve from a statewide perspective. We have, like I mentioned, over 400 folks in our industry, and so we are able to spread that out, if you will, from serving those states. But I will say, maybe to add on to that, though, we have maybe a committee or a group that we all talk with each other, if you will, that work on the statewide audits very regularly and share resources, situations we're seeing, conversations we have with any of the feds as it relates to complexities or things. And so we have a really great informal network, if you will, with our other state teams to really be able to bring that to Nevada.
And for the record, one other comment is we have also, in the last 2 years, brought on 2 new states, and those being the state of Massachusetts and the state of Maryland during the pandemic.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay. And just the same question I asked BDO, but how much time or what percentage of your time do you spend on site with state agencies in their office?
Sure. Excuse me. And it really would depend on what the needs are of each agency. We really feel it's important to discuss that with each of the major state agencies that we do work with. COVID has changed the game with a lot of that as in terms of what needs to be on site versus off site, but we're committed to being on site. And I think from some of the RFP, questions and answers, it sounds like a lot of the state agencies would prefer maybe additional on-site time, post-COVID, if you will. And so we are committed to that and willing to bring resources to meet those needs. So we have also performed full statewide single audits completely remotely or primarily remotely and still meeting timelines and deadlines and addressing all the risks. So we've done the gamut, if you will, to see kind of what works for each state.
Thank you. And just the last, two more questions. Just the same question. Did you reach out to any of our state agencies to get information or answer any questions that you guys had before submitting your RFP?
Yes, we did reach out to the state controller's office, but that was, prior to the RFP period, if you will. So we have spoken to members of the state previous to that, though.
Thank you. And just my last question. Again, you've heard how severely impacted we are with staffing amongst state agencies. So what would you do to lessen the impact of hiring a new audit company to come in and do the audit so that our state employees aren't overly burdened with a new company?
Sure. No, we understand that's a big concern, and we're seeing that across the country. Paul, would you mind speaking on that one?
Yeah, a great question. And I think, as I just mentioned with Maryland and Massachusetts, those are both new entities that we brought on during COVID. And it's just that knowledge that we bring to the table and not having to train the auditors from the state's perspective and the understanding of what you do before we're asking the questions. And I think that's really important as we bring our team to the table and they interact with your team. We have to lessen the burden of your stakeholders and your staff. So that has been our game plan. And what Allison alluded to is our team kind of works together. And so if we see issues happening around the other states, we already know what's going on. We work with the Office of Inspector General to talk about some of the federal items that are happening. So it's not like we're last to the table and bringing things up that you maybe already know. Sometimes we'll bring thought-provoking questions or things that you may not even have heard of based upon our interactions as a team as with other federal agencies.
Thank you. Members, last call. Assemblymember Dickman? Okay, thank you. I want to thank you for being here. And you said this was your third time in front of us, so thank you.
Thank you so much. We appreciate it.
Okay, members, the next agency is Crow, and I believe we have Ms. Kathy Lai here to present.
Good afternoon, Chair and Committee. My name is Kathy Lai, and I'm a partner with Crow, and I'm also serving as the lead state and local government audit partner for our practice nationally. It's just a great pleasure to be here on behalf of the firm to present to you as to why we believe Crow would be the best firm suited to perform audit services. I had a chance to carefully review the proposal evaluation summary, and I did note that Crow was in the top 3 of recommended firms. In similar fashion, I really wanted to offer you the top 3 reasons why selecting Crow would be advantageous to the state and certainly in the best interest of the state. First and foremost, it's our deep specialization with respect to state and local governments as well as specifically into Nevada. Currently, I serve as the auditor for many large Nevada governments, including Clark County as my specific client, City of Las Vegas, the Clark County Department of Aviation or the Harry Reid International Airport, RTC of Southern Nevada, as well as Washoe County, and colleagues of mine also audit the Washoe County Unified School District and others. So as you can clearly see from a technical perspective and a governmental auditing perspective, we have been deeply committed to auditing Nevada governments. I'd be remiss if I didn't say that we were also recently being recommended for the City of North Las Vegas, as was previously mentioned, and then also we serve as the current auditor for the Legislative Council Bureau as well. So from a perspective of investment into Nevada governments, I believe our firm has displayed that. When you couple that with respect to our experience experience on the state level, I wanted to mention a few quals that I wanted to highlight. So for example, I have personal firsthand experience as a lead engagement partner for the State of California Single Audit. As you might know, the State of California Single Audit is a very large single audit. Their schedule of expenditures of federal awards includes approximately $90 billion of federal funds, of which about $50 billion of that was Medicaid funding. When you compare and contrast that to the State of Nevada's schedule of expenditures of federal awards, which is roughly around $11 billion, clearly I have personal firsthand experience of leading an engagement team to do a very large single audit. If you add that perspective to also colleagues of mine as well as my own personal experience, I also serve as an engagement partner for the State of Indiana State Board of Accounts. They have engaged Crow to perform a portion of their single audit, including about 10 programs or so. And from what I understand from the lead partner, will be engaged for future additional programs over time. So members of our proposed team have experience on the State of Indiana State Board of Accounts as well. And I'm also aware of lead senior managers within our public sector practice, have experience being the lead senior manager for the State of Delaware as well as the State of Pennsylvania state financial statement audits as well as the single audits as well. So as you can tell from a deep specialization, not only in Nevada governments, we also bring some national quals relative to state and local governments. That's our first reason. Our second reason I'd like to offer, which I think we've already talked about a little bit here, and that's fresh perspective with proven smooth transitions. You have been audited by the same firm for quite some time, and I know that there are some challenges, to the committee to consider the benefits of fresh perspective, and that really only works when you have proven smooth transitions. And as I mentioned before, very recently we've taken over Clark County over the last 5 years, likewise City of Las Vegas, Department of Aviation, et cetera, and we have been able to successfully transition those clients from your current incumbent firm and then other competitors that are here today. Last but not least, and I think this is very important to consider, Crow is the lowest cost responsible bidder that's here today. Management noted in their evaluation summary today that technically all of these firms are qualified to perform the work, and there's certainly nuances relative to what one firm can bring versus the other. And Crow, if you compare the scoring from a cost perspective, is offering $1.4 million lower in aggregate fees than the number one submitted bid, an incumbent auditor. We were very intentional with respect to being very respectful of any budgetary constraints during this really difficult and uncertain time. During the proposal process, the prior fees were disclosed for fiscal year 20. During the proposal evaluation summary, I did note that the prior year fees for 2021 were disclosed at about $642,000. And Crow was very respectful of that and intentionally started our bid at $640,000. I hope you carefully consider what a substantial cost savings that is to the state, especially during this really uncertain time relative to COVID and otherwise. Another thing to point out is that when we took into consideration over a 4-year period, our CPI increases were only limited to 3%. I'm sure many of you have seen that Consumer Price Index has increased substantially to about 7.5%. That is the largest increase that we have seen since 1981, and Crow has shouldered over 60% of that CPI increase, coupled with starting with the lowest responsible cost bid. So I hope you consider that these top three reasons for selecting Crow. We truly do believe that it would be in the best interest of the state to consider our bid, and it certainly would be an honor to serve as your new auditors. And I'd be happy to address any questions you might have.
Thank you, Ms. Lai. I'm going to go to the committee members first. I'm going to start with Assemblymember Miller.
Thank you, Chair Houdegy. Thank you for that. My question is, because of your experience already working with, I believe you named aviation, Clark County, possibly North Las Vegas, LCB, when it comes to this type of work and audit, do you find that to be a challenge, a conflict, or a benefit that you already have so much experience and prior knowledge with so many municipalities in Nevada?
Thank you for the question. Kathy Lai with Crow, for the record. Absolutely a benefit. I mean, when I talk about these Nevada governments, these are the very stakeholders that, when you take into consideration the American Rescue Plan Act and the State and Local Fiscal Recovery Fund and the number of funds that are being distributed from the state of Nevada to these very large governments like Clark County, like City of Las Vegas, that would only be to our advantage to understanding the broader perspective of not just the state, but all of the respective stakeholders.
Follow-up, Chair? And this may be a question for legal, again, but not for legal, I'm sorry, for audit. When it comes to, again, the factors or the considerations that were given, have we reached out to these different groups to see their satisfaction with the evaluations or the audits? Was that part of the process?
For the record, Dan Crossman, Legislative Auditor. Yes, Assemblywoman Miller, we, as part of our process, we did call references that were provided in the RFPs to assess the satisfaction, any concerns that those clients might have had.
And that would pertain to all 5 different, or just to Crow because we have so much local experience?
For the record, Dan Crossman, we did, I may ask Ms. Getz to speak directly to it, but we did call for every one of the firms, we called a number of their references and discussed this with them.
Okay, thank you. I'm fine with that, unless there's more she would like to.
Assemblywoman Miller, this is Tammy Getz, Audit Supervisor for the record. Yes, for all 5 firms that submitted a proposal, we called a couple references from each of them and asked multiple questions regarding the work that that firm had done for them. Some examples of those were, did they satisfy the budget? Were they satisfied with their work and so forth?
Thank you so much.
Senator Dennis?
Thank you. And I'm going to just ask all I have one additional one this time with them. I noticed on the partner manager percentage, you're at 19%, which is lower than everybody else, which, of course, then you also address the issue that you also have the lowest fee that you've got. Talk a little bit about that, because, I mean, that's like, having the managers and everybody looking at that, that's an important thing. So is the reason that your fee is so low just because you don't have as much management overseeing it?
Yeah, let me be clear. We are working with limited information as we submit these bids. I will commit the firm's resources at the highest level, both at the partner, senior manager, and the director level, likewise our national resources, to complete the job appropriately. So I understand that that might be lower than competitors. The other thing that I challenge you to think through is that this is a 4-year competitive bid. And I would like to believe, and I'm sure my competitors would agree with me, where we are as of today for fiscal year 22 and what we've proposed for ours should not be where we should be in fiscal years 23, 4, and 5. I would hope that we would want to resume a sense of normalcy, and relative to total hours during the RFP process and the Q&A process, I think it's important for the committee to understand that what was disclosed to the competitors is certainly the fiscal year 20 hours, and they noted that those were remarkably higher, particularly because of COVID and remote work. And then they also disclosed the hours for fiscal years for fiscal years 19 as well, saying that that was pretty consistent with prior years. And those fiscal year 19 hours were 4,312 hours to be precise. And so given that information, Crow did not want to propose and arbitrarily increase our bid significantly relative what we believe is going to be maybe 1 year of enduring another difficult pandemic year, looking forward to another 3 or 4 years, if that makes sense. But, getting back to your original question about partner manager time, certainly we would size up with respect to appropriate staffing so that we get to the right answers and can opine on our financial statements and single audit report appropriately.
Thank you. And So you heard me ask on the other ones about the turnover, and that kind of addressed that issue.
Yeah, absolutely. The Great Resignation is very peculiar. I'm sure you're understanding that and feeling that on your side. There's been salary offers to some of my colleagues at a very young staff right out of college, at a certain high percentage that we've seen. And if we're seeing it on, the for-profit side, I'm certainly sure that you're seeing that on the government side as well. What I will tell you is this. I joined Crow 6 years ago from other firms because I believed in our core values, because I believed in care, trust, and stewardship and courage. And I think that permeates, to be quite honest, it really sets our firm apart from others. We have certain policies and procedures relative to employee engagement, diversity, equity, and inclusion, business resource groups for a variety of different affinity groups that I think makes Crow an employer of choice, separate and distinct from other firms that you might be speaking with today. And so while we have felt that, I would say maybe firm-wide, I'm pleased to report in the public sector practice, our turnover is far less than the firm-wide as a whole. So that seems to impact our public sector, our state and local government clients far less. We're certainly not immune to it, and here's what I can offer with respect to that. I have made it a habit relative to my very large engagements like Clark County, Vegas, et cetera, and otherwise, where we double up relative to managers' time and certain leaders so that if we ever run into the unfortunate circumstance of someone leaving the firm, that we can appropriately have proper succession planning. So I hope that addresses your question.
It does, thank you. And I already asked the other one as part of the first one, so thank you.
Okay, members? Okay. Assemblymember Dickman? Do you have any questions?
You guys are asking all my questions. Appreciate it.
Okay, thank you. I do have a couple of questions for you, and I'm sure you've heard them asked to other agencies, but I do want to start because this was a big topic of discussion right now, the proposed costs that you submitted as well as the hours and using, fiscal year 2019 or year 2019 hours. But
sure.
There has been delays in 2020 and 2021 because of the pandemic, and we probably foresee, delays in the next audit, right? I mean, did you take that into account? And if there are further delays, is that going to impact the costs that you've proposed?
No, based on the information that I have as of today, we certainly are expecting it to be a tough year. Obviously, our competitors here don't have the added advantage of seeing the fiscal year 21 financial statements and single audit reports, so we're kind of operating based on a year in arrears at this point, but it certainly has informed us regarding some of the challenges that you've been having. So we have committed to a not-to-exceed fee, as noted before, and it being very respectful of budgetary constraints and consistent with prior years.
Okay, and so you don't foresee any other circumstances where there would be a cause for you to come back and request more, an increase in fees?
So I think this is worth mentioning. In the RFP, it asked for a not to exceed fee, but it did not include a minimum number of major programs, or in other words, federal grants, to be audited under the single audit. And that is actually, I think, one of the peculiar aspects of the RFP. I think through the question and answer period, some firms, including myself, had asked, may we submit a bid acknowledging a baseline number of major programs or federal grants to be audited in detail, for example, 12, and then certainly if there's anything in excess of that, we could discuss and mutually agree upon fees, based on appropriate level of effort. And the answer to that was no in the Q&A. And I thought that was a peculiar procurement practice, to be quite frank. But being respectful of that, we did have discussions with firm leadership and otherwise. We did analyze the number of major programs that have been audited from fiscal years 18, 19, 20, and 21. And let me give you the range of those. Fiscal year 18 was 13 programs, 19, 17. Fiscal year 20, there were 15, and then now fiscal year 21, we have 18, likely because of the pandemic-related funding. But my point is that there's a very large range. Knowing that it was a large range and the highest that we had seen in the previous 4 fiscal years being 18, my firm committed to are fees of including 15 to 20 major programs. So to address your question, we would not be coming back unless it's in excess of 20. And we truly believe that is more than fair, given that the state's RFP process did not really give a lot of comparability, relative to the competitors today, especially not having seen the fiscal year 21 issued single audit report.
Thank you. Okay, and do you have an office here in Nevada?
We do not. I hail from Southern Nevada. I'm from Henderson and a proud grad from Green Valley High School and have family here. And it is my personal commitment to try to open up an office here in Las Vegas, as you can see from the laundry list of very large governments in which we serve. And I've got a great love for the state, and we don't have one now, but it's certainly a personal goal of mine.
Thank you. Okay. And so how many other single statewide audits are you guys currently responsible for?
So currently, I mentioned the state of Indiana State Board of Accounts has engaged Crow to perform the fiscal year 21 single audit, a portion of major programs. My understanding, as well as financial and compliance audits for a variety of different governments. The way the state of Indiana is structured in similar fashion to Nevada, the state auditor can certainly conduct those audits, or they can outsource a portion thereof. And so the state of Indiana right now is our current single audit client. I would also like to provide, again, as I mentioned, I do have direct experience with the state of California single audit as a lead engagement partner, and specifically with Medicaid experience, which I believe is a clear differentiator. Medicaid is a very complex federal grant, and I can certainly offer that as the lead partner.
And would it be the same team working on Indiana and working on Nevada?
We have separate teams, but we certainly have, similar to some of my other competitors here, colleagues that are subject matter experts and would be available to our team, particularly in the planning phase, particularly in relation to any audit findings and recommendations that pertain to compliance and otherwise. We have included in our financial statement audit and compliance audit proposal specialists that sit on the AICPA Government Audit Quality Center, their executive committee. We have Brian Archambault, who is his primary role sits in our national assurance professional practice, specifying on quality, and he is available to address all of the technical single audit questions that come up because he serves on this committee and works on the liaisons with the National Single Audit Roundtable with all the different federal agencies, et cetera. So he would be available. And as well as myself, I've also served as the AICPA State and Local Government Expert Panel. It's a panel of 15 members from across the country, 400,000 CPAs, and I know some of my colleagues here have also served on that, but we would be able to offer that type of expertise for your audit as well as the state of Indiana.
Okay, thank you. And then just to confirm, you said you had worked on the California statewide single audit. So
absolutely, I was one of the lead partners on that, and in particular, again, $90 billion in federal expenditures. Medicaid at the time was around $50 to $60 billion of that.
Okay, thank you. And did you contact any of our state agencies to just speak with them, answer any questions that you had before submitting your RFP?
We did not. We were very respectful of the RFP requirements, although I'd be remiss. I do want to make it clear, as I mentioned before, I am the current auditor for the Legislative Council Bureau, and so we were very careful and intentional about not having discussions about this prior to submitting our bid.
Okay, thank you. And then my last question, how can you assure us that you would lessen the impact to state employees if we hired a new firm?
Absolutely. I think I've already talked about, relative to some of the policies and procedures and culture of my firm that I think inherently helps to continuity on our side, right? Because we don't want continuity to be an issue on both sides of the fence. But I do understand the challenge. I'm going to offer a different perspective. At Crow, we have a lot of different proprietary technologies that we invest in. One of them is the Crow Secure Information Exchange, or for short, we call it Exchange. And it's our primary project management tool. And the only reason why I raise this relative how to lessen burden relative to the agencies, especially with so much turnover, is our tool, as we request items for the variety of different audit procedures that we perform, our tool has the ability to contain those items for future audit periods. And so say your audit liaison from prior year isn't there the next year, then whomever is taking that place will have access to that. And that helps promote succession planning. It helps promote institutional knowledge that's not lost. And so we're always constantly thinking of, ways to incorporate technology to help with real world problems like continuity and turnover at our respective clients. And we have found that they have thoroughly enjoyed that, and it's been very helpful when they weren't prepared, relative to continuity.
Thank you, Ms. Lai. Members, last call? Assemblymember Dickman? Okay, thank you, Ms. Lai. It's nice
Thank
to
you
see a
very
fellow
much.
Nevadan at the table.
Thank you. Take care.
Thank you, members. Okay, our last agency that we have here is Ida Bailey, and I believe we have Mr. Kurt Schlicker, Ms. Tamara Miramontes here to present.
Hi, thank you. Kurt Schlicker with Ide Bailey. I'm a partner for the record.
Good afternoon. I am Tamara Miramontes, and I am also a partner. I'm in the Las Vegas office, and I have been performing audits for 28 years. I am actually the engagement partner for the last 3 years for the state of Nevada audit, and Kurt has been partnering with me this year. And we have a ton of government experience as well. Pretty much all the clients that Kathy talked about, we have also had prior experience along with probably 40 or 50 additional Nevada governments.
Chair and committee members, thank you for the opportunity to speak to you all regarding the audit of the state of Nevada. We have been the auditors, as previously mentioned, for almost 30 years, and the state remains a very highly valued client to us. I feel confident that our proposal illustrated why we believe Ide Bailey remains the best fit and the best business partner for the state. However, I will take this opportunity to highlight some of our firm's strengths. As I just previously stated, we have been the auditors of the state for almost 30 years. The last couple of those years have been a significant challenge for all the reasons that the members have already heard, so I'm not going to dive into them too much. However, from an audit perspective, we were there hand in hand with the state during the implementation of the CARES Act, the implementation of the American Rescue Plan, unemployment insurance. We were there on site when there were, riots almost out in the parking lot, when they had to have armed escort into the building. We were there hand in hand with the state working through that sensitive time and working on that sensitive project. Medicaid during the pandemic, we were there auditing the state. Fiduciary activities, which was a new GASB standard that came into play and was implemented during the pandemic, we were there and assisted with the state. And of course, all the other recent legislation that has been passed. We worked with the multitude of state agencies and built on our foundational knowledge of the state and our expertise of the subject matter to help guide the agencies in implementation of all of those federal legislation and audit standards, while also ensuring a high-quality audit. When I look to the next 4 years, from an audit perspective, it's not going to get any easier on the state. It really isn't. The state is facing continued challenges in the American Rescue Plan and the spending of that money, the obligating of that money. Very significant lease standards on both tangible and intangible leases. What that means is the governmental accounting community, we're reevaluating how you account for leases, both whether it's land, property, equipment, or software and your cloud-based service maintenance arrangements. All of that is going to be re-examined and re-accounted for. If the American Rescue Plan and the new lease standards wasn't enough, we're also in the midst of the Great Resignation, as so many of us have spoken today about. The turnover at the state has been significant. We've observed it, and we've been able to pivot and adjust our audit procedures to adjust for it. When we go in for an entrance conference and we speak with management, typically and a lot of times, the management is different by the time we get there on the audit. We've been able to pivot and audit accordingly. If all of that, again, was still not enough, the state is in the middle of implementing a new statewide accounting system during the contract period. The implementation of a new accounting system is a significant hurdle to both internal staff and external auditors alike. However, these challenges are challenges that we are prepared for. We developed our proposal based on our historical knowledge of the state and what it takes to audit it, as well as understanding these upcoming challenges that are very prevalent for the state. We determined our hours based on that and the level of partner and manager involvement and engagement to ensure a high quality audit, but to also help with implementation assistance so that state agencies aren't on an island just trying to figure this all out by themselves without any assistance. We're there for the state. Why is Eide Bailly the right choice to be your auditors? We employ over 150 full-time equivalents in the state of Nevada. Last year alone, we had 34 staff charge time to the state of Nevada audit and assist with the project. 22 of those 34 had over 40 hours, with many of them having hundreds of hours, as you can imagine, to get to over 6,000. We audit more than 40 governments in the state of Nevada. What does this say and what does this illustrate about us? We are a Nevada firm, Mountain Lot in Elko, or at the lot in Ely for NDOT. We have an office in Elko ready and prepared to assist, which they've evidenced because they've performed the inventory observations for us in the past. We have substantial manager and partner involvement with 46% of our hours in the proposal dedicated, and that's not fake. That's based on historical averages and what we know it takes to complete the job. Our managers and partners are on site the majority of the time, almost every single day during field work. What this commitment means is that there are multiple managers and a partner working directly one-on-one with state staff and our own audit staff to take care of issues as they arise. And they are complex and they are difficult. We believe this level of service is required to ensure appropriate audit quality on a job the size and the complexity of the state of Nevada. The state is not a training ground for newer staff, and it's not a job where staff can go out and perform the work and the partner review it from a 30,000-foot view. It requires partner engagement. We take our role as the state's auditor very seriously, not only because it is our job as CPAs, but also because we are members of this community. We live here in Nevada, and we work to ensure audit standards and federal standards are adhered to protect the state itself from harm, but also to ensure accountability to its citizens and regulators. Myself, it's not just Nevada-centric. I do also consult and assist 4 other states on matters of the American Rescue Plan, Coronavirus Relief Fund, their small business assistance programs. The state of Massachusetts is one of them where I assisted in helping for their audit prep. With the expected challenges that the next 4 years will bring and the level of service we provide, we strongly believe we are the right choice for the state of Nevada. Thank you for your time and considerations, and we would be happy to answer any questions that the chair or members may have.
Thank you. And I will go to the members first, but I just want to get this on the record. So you're a Nevada-based company? This is where you're headquartered?
So Eide Bailly, the firm, is actually, incorporated in Fargo, but the office that's performing the work, we're all in Nevada. Almost 95% of the staff working on this engagement live and work in Nevada.
Okay, and you said that was 150 employees, I believe?
We have 150 full-time equivalents. On a given year, we're anywhere around 30 staff assisting on the project. And other than IT support that comes from across the country, all the staff that are performing work on the single audit, on the financial audit, other than our quality control director, are in Nevada.
Thank you. I'm going to go to members first. after I took my privilege as chair. I'll start with Senator Dennis.
Sure. You addressed most of these already, the ones I've been asking. The percentage of partner manager, obviously that number is really high, so that would be why, perhaps, your fees are higher because those are, so talk a little bit about that. You kind of covered it, but any additional that would go with that?
Yes, Kurt Schlicker, Ide Bailey for the record. We have a lot of history with the state, and there's no discounting that, and we've looked at what it's taken previously to work through the complex issues at the state, whether it's the qualified opinion on inventory or transactions with discretely presented component units or unemployment insurance, et cetera, et cetera. And we know from experience that it takes somewhere between 40 to 50% of partner and manager engagement in the job to ensure that we can come to a conclusion, to assure we can assist the state in any implementation questions they have. It takes that level of effort from the management team on the job. We built that in. We bifurcated and created a detailed budget about what that looks like. And yes, our fees from an hourly perspective are close to some of our competitors and higher than some of our others, but that's to reflect the partner and manager level of engagement that it takes for this job.
Okay. And there was something that came up on the other one that I wanted to ask. Oh, what's your opinion on the issue that the 2020 hours were higher than normal? And is it your opinion that those are going to continue higher, or they're going to come down?
Thank you, Kurt Schlicker, Ide Bailey for the record. The pandemic definitely impacted us profoundly, and the audit went from a little over 4,000 hours to over 6,000 hours. We contemplated and wondered if that was a one-off and what would happen. And I think what we've seen is a combination of the federal legislation and all the continued programs, but also the state turnover and the resignation and the fatigue that it's had on the state agencies has really led to everything taking longer. And then when we look at, we still have the American Rescue Plan. We have very significant audit standards coming up with the leases, and that's not to be understated. Speaking with the Controller's Office, there's an estimated of over 1,000 leases that have to be reevaluated. If you think of 1,000 leases, if you only spend 30 minutes a lease, that's at least 500 hours. And so when we take a look at that, coupled with where we've been, coupled with the fatigue that we see at the state agencies and the turnover close to 30%, we just don't see that decreasing in the near term. Then we add the statewide accounting system in year 3. That is really not to be understated. A statewide accounting system has such a profound impact on both internal staff and auditors. They're talking about non-parallel implementation where they're going to have to get audit documents out of one system when they're still using a new one. That type of auditing and requirements is hugely significant and impactful, and so we don't anticipate the hours reducing below 6,000 during the contract period.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Members? Assemblymember Dickman?
No, thank you, ma'am.
Senator Hammond?
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. You've heard my question in the past. It's always about making sure that things are timely. We have a lot riding on what we do here, and I want to make sure that every firm is committed to allocating the resources when necessary to make sure it gets over the deadline, even or gets there on deadline day, regardless of what it may cost you. And I just want to make sure I get the same confirmation from you all.
Yeah, Kurt Schlicker, Ide Bailey for the record. We audit the state almost year-round. We start our interim in May in normal years, and then we go all the way through the audit cycle. We're committed to meeting the timeline and deadlines that are in the contract. That being said, and I'll be honest, we're at the mercy sometimes of responses from state agencies and those significant transactions and how complex they are and how long they take to work through. And to bring up where the current year audit is, we're still waiting on information from the State Controller's Office. So it's really hard for us to audit it if we don't have it yet. And so we're at the mercy of waiting on that information to be able to audit it. However, I will say during field work and during the hot and heavy scheduled time, we're on site every day working significant overtime with as much resources as the state can handle to be able to answer questions. We can put 10 auditors in a room, but when there's only 3 or 4 staff to be able to respond to questions, they have a hard time responding to 10 questions, from 10 auditors a day. So we have to balance what their workload is, how efficiently they can respond to us to continue a good relationship and effective and efficient audit. We can't bombard them with, a bunch of auditors all at once asking them a ton of questions.
Thank you. And I am going to go ahead and ask a series of questions too. 2020 audit was 6,363. I'm assuming that was higher than what had been proposed. Do you know what had been proposed?
Yeah, Kurt Schlicker, Ide Bailey for the record. So what was proposed previously was slightly over 4,000. And speaking of budget and trying not to harm the state, our 2021 previously proposed rate per hour was $152 an hour. If you look at the fiscal year 22 rate per hour, it's $154 per hour. So our increase in fees, and yes, there was 642 and now we're at 950 for the next year, that increase is directly proportional to the increase in hours and time and effort that it's took. Also speaking to that, we had discussions with the legislative auditor about a potential change order during the pandemic, which we decided not to pursue. We did not come back for over 2,000 hours in contract overages in 2020 or in 2021. We stuck to the terms of the contract. We believe in the state of Nevada. We value our partnership with the state, and we did not come back and pursue a change order for over 4,000 hours in excess of the contract.
Okay, so you said you had proposed over 4,000 hours in 2020, and I'm assuming it was over 4,000 for 2021 as well.
They
but
were
then the actual hours were over 6,300, and I'm assuming 2021 will exceed 6,300, and you kept your costs to the same. Okay.
Yes, that is correct.
Do you know what the expected hours for 2021 will be? Do you know when we can expect the audit to be complete and how many hours?
Kurt Schlicker, Ide Bailey for the record. We progress billed it at the end of March, which was over the 6,000 hours that Audit Supervisor Getz mentioned earlier. We're projecting it to be closer to 6,500 by the time we are done this year.
Okay, thank you. Okay, and I'm going to just ask you some of the similar questions, just a variation of them, because I do want to know. But how much time do you guys spend in our state agencies?
Kurt Schlicker, Ide Bailey for the record. During the single audit, our direction to managers and staff and myself is to go out on site for every single audit program as long as the agency doesn't request that we not be there. And that happened a couple of times during the pandemic because they didn't feel comfortable. However, other than that specific request, we're on site at every single state agency that we're auditing.
Okay, thank you. And what have you done, over the last couple years to make it easier to perform the audits, to make it easier for our state agencies? Because again, you're aware, you're in there, that we are experiencing extreme vacancies. And so it's difficult for our state agencies sometimes to get you the information that you need. And so have you guys taken any measures to make the audits easier for our state agencies so that they're not more overwhelmed?
Yes, Kurt Schlicker, Ide Bailey for the record. We have an entrance conference with every single state agency. We provide a document list, a request list up front. We mirror that and keep it very similar in nature from year after year. We also provide examples of what the prior year support was, because there is a lot of turnover and they don't necessarily know what every report is or what every supporting document that we're looking for. So we have an entrance conference. We discuss that face-to-face if we can, or remotely if they're asking for that. But we have that every single year. We also have our online tools similar to our competitors, that documents are uploaded and maintained on a yearly basis, and we can see that every year. We also re-engineer the audit almost every summer, where we come back internally and analyze what could we do better, what things were a struggle, where can we improve, how can we ask for this a better way, because maybe we put in a request to the Department of Taxation and it took a month to respond because they didn't understand. So how can we phrase it, how can we ask for it differently? We take that re-engineering process seriously, and we do it every summer.
Okay, thank you. And I do have just a couple more questions. How many other statewide single audits do you guys perform?
Kurt Schlicker with I. Bailey for the record. So we perform the state of Nevada. We perform pockets of other state single audits because, quite frankly, as mentioned, there's only 13 that are contracted out. So we do various programs here or there. We don't do any full statewide single audits because there's just not that many of them. However, like I mentioned earlier, I do consult and assist for other states with their American Rescue Plan, their Coronavirus Relief Fund, CARES Act, single audit, and to matters of that nature.
Okay, and then just to get my number right, you did say that in your presentation there was 40 other governments that you guys perform audits for. Was that 40 governments in Nevada?
Yes.
Nevada-based governments?
40 Nevada governments.
Okay, and then just my last question to you, just because your manager participation was higher than others, and I mean, having been with Nevada that long, 30 years, you still, and I'm assuming that's a little bit of what increases the cost as well, but you've been in Nevada for 28, 30 years, and do you still feel that that level of manager participation is necessary?
Kurt Schlicker, I. Bailey for the record. Very much so. In fact, I think the level of partner and manager involvement has increased over the years. Auditing standards have gotten more complex. Over the last few years, we've had GASB 68, which doesn't mean a whole lot to you, but pension standards have changed, post-retirement health standards have changed, fiduciary activities have changed, where now we have to audit the income statement of the inmate accounts for the Department of Corrections. Standards have changed, federal standards have changed and become more complex. Turnover has increased at the state. So if turnover has increased at the state and standards have become more complex, that requires a higher level of engagement from your auditors, because that's just what's needed to perform the job.
Okay, and I actually have one last question, because you mentioned this, and I don't think this was a question we asked the other agencies, but we are going through a financial management system change, which is it's going to be huge, right? You guys have been with us so long. Is this the first time that you've experienced an accounting system change in our state, or have you gone through one before?
Well, Kurt Schlicker, I. Bailey for the record. I think it's the first change of the state since the early 90s, but I'm not 100% positive on that. That's just my base understanding. There's been add-ons, added on top of the core accounting system, but this is a universal switch out of the system, and you're implementing an entirely new ERP system. We've done that with other clients and worked through that process. Most of our competitors have also probably experienced that, but the impact to the state to change an ERP system is thousands upon thousands of hours.
Okay, thank you. Members, last call? Okay, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you.
I believe we still have Ms. Getz and Ms. Rydell at the table, so I'm so glad you're there. We do have some additional questions from you, from our members, so if you don't mind, I'm going to go for round 2 of questions to our audit team. I believe, Ms. Miller, did you have a question, or was it just Senator Dennis? Senator Dennis?
Thank you. So the first one, I just wanted to see if you could address the issue of the 2020 numbers being so high, and what what staff anticipates that those numbers to look like moving forward.
Senator Dennis, this is Tammy Getz, Audit Supervisor. For the last couple years, as I. Bailey had indicated, the hours had increased a couple thousand hours due to the pandemic and certain federal programs, additional programs, and additional compliance requirements. They do anticipate, with the leases that we've previously mentioned, that will add additional hours. So for the next 4 years, I think we still are going to see above the 4,000 that we had in 2019.
Okay, thank you. And then in the ranking process, did you did we look at anything related to staffing and diversity within the staff of any of the firms?
Senator Dennis, this is Tammy Getz, Audit Supervisor. During our scoring process, we don't have a specific scoring item where we look at diversity per se. We do base our technical scoring on the technical expertise of the staff that will be performing the project. However, all of the 5 accounting firms in their proposals, they did discuss diversity and how they handle that within the firm.
Great. Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Okay, thank you, members, and thank you, agencies, for being here and indulging us, well, indulging all our questions. Any additional comments from the members? Or? Okay, at this time, I think I'm going to allow us to go into recess. Assemblymember Dickman, we will be reaching out to you. Please stay close to your phone. Thank you. Thank you. So, members, we're in recess. Back? Oh, let's wait for Joe. Welcome back, members. We are out of recess and back in committee. And again, I want to thank all of the agencies for being here. I know that you've spent many hours, not just on the proposal that you submitted to our state, but also in preparing for this meeting and coming before this committee and answering all of the questions. So I want to thank you for your interest in Nevada and your willingness to be here and be a partner with our state. This was a difficult decision to make because the scoring was so close. But in the end, I think the committee has faith and confidence in the scoring system used by our audit division. I know there's some members that would like to make some comments. I'm going to turn to Senator Hammond. Would you like to make comments now, or would you like to wait till after the motion during discussion?
I think I'll wait till after the motion and during discussion, and that'd be good. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Senator. Senator Dennis, same? Yeah. Okay, thank you. So with that, I would entertain a motion to award the contract for a statewide single audit to the firm Ida Bailey.
Second.
Oh. I have a first by Senator Dennis, a second by Assembly Member Miller. Any discussion on the motion? Senator Hammond.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And while I will probably support the motion, there was a lot of debate, and I probably could go in another direction. I felt like CLA did a really good job of presenting, and so one of the things I was looking for was a fresh pair of eyes. I was looking for somebody who can look at it a different way. I looked for competitive advantage, and I thought that, when somebody's doing a audit and they're doing it over several states, I thought that was good for the state to have folks who were seeing patterns in other states. I liked that sometimes change is good. And I was looking at the cost, and the scoring was so close. The rubric that was used by our staff, the scoring rubric was so close that I thought that several other firms were in the running. But I really was looking, and I had, and I don't know if it's appropriate or not to say the name. I think I already said it once, but I thought the CLA did a really good job. Your presentation was really good, and I thought that you could have done a really good job with the state as well. But for me, competitive advantage is one of those things that you do something over and over again, you become really good at it, and so that's what I liked. But Madam Chair, I probably will support the motion as stated by you.
Thank you, Senator Hammond. Senator Dennis?
Thank you. So, I've done this process not just here, but in other organizations. Some that have been audited by some of these folks. I think that I also was looking at that issue of, is it time to get a fresh pair of eyes as we look at this, and the fact that the scoring was so similar. I have confidence that any of these firms could do a good job, obviously. Also, what our staff, the process they went through, I take a lot of that as information that I would use in making a decision. I think that so I support the motion. Even though it's this, going with the same firm that we've had for many years, I think that they could also create a fresh pair of eyes scenario in the way that they do things. I know we've got so many new people in our state in the different departments with people retiring and those kind of things. So I think there's some consistency. Having some consistency, I think there's also good. And I would say in the future, I guess for the process, one of the things I think that we should look at is also the diversity in the workforce. I didn't see that necessarily in the presentations that were given today and in the information, but I think that giving opportunities for folks in our communities that perhaps haven't had that opportunity, I think that would be good to look at as we move in the future. But those are kind of my thoughts. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Senator. Members, any other comments? Okay, Assembly Member Dickman.
Just a quick one. I just wanted to echo what a difficult decision this was with so many, really 5 qualified applicants. And I'm going to go along with the motion as well, but just wanted to thank everyone and wish we could do more than one.
Thank you, Assembly Member, and I do want to add some comments in as well. It was a very difficult decision, and when the decision is so close, one of the things that really weighted in was relying on our staff and the scoring system that they used, and in the end, that's where my comfort level was, and I'm looking at who was the highest scoring agency, but I do want to echo the sentiments of my colleague, Senator Dennis, that I know that when they're looking at staff as a scoring measurement, that they're looking at the experience of the staff, but I think that one of the things that would be important to me in the future is also looking at the diversity of the staff as well, and really taking into account, for the firms that are here, are they reflective of what our state looks like, and are we giving opportunity to those communities that have been underserved or underrepresented? So with that, we have our motion first from Senator Dennis, a second from Assembly Member Miller. All those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, nay. Motion carries. Thank you. And thank you for being here. Members, I'm going to just wait a few moments to give our agencies who are being audited a moment to get into the committee room. Okay, members, we are going to go back and take our agenda item in order now. So we are going back to agenda item number 4, which is the presentation of audit reports. The first audit, which we will be hearing, is agenda item number 4A, an audit of the Department of Health and Human Services, Division of Child and Family Services, Assessment and Safety of Child Placement. And we have Deputy Legislative Auditor Scott Jones and Audit Supervisor Tammy Getz here. When you are ready, Mr. Jones and Ms. Getz, please proceed.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the Audit Subcommittee. For the record, my name is Scott Jones, Deputy Legislative Auditor. If I could direct your attention to page 1, I will begin my presentation with some background information. The Division's mission is to provide support and services to assist Nevada's children and families in reaching their full human potential. Child welfare services are funded primarily by state and federal funds. As indicated in Exhibit 1 on page 2, the Division had revenues of $23 million and expenditures of $21 million supporting rural child welfare in fiscal year 2021. Child welfare agencies provide and oversee a continuum of services to support children, parents, and caregivers. The continuum of services includes comprehensive case management, emergency shelter care, foster and relative care, group home care, respite care, residential treatment care, and independent living services. Page 3 provides an overview of the Division's child welfare responsibilities, including the process for child removal and the Division's monitoring of foster and unlicensed homes. Exhibit 2 on page 4 provides the total number of homes housing children in state custody by county and licensure status. On page 5, Exhibit 3 provides an overview of the Division process for monitoring the safety of child placements, whether they be placed into a licensed foster home or placed with a relative or fictive kin as an unlicensed placement. The last section of the introduction outlines payments supporting child out-of-home care. Exhibit 4 provides foster care payments by type for fiscal year 2021. On page 6, we describe our audit scope and objectives. The scope of our audit included a review of the division's activities for the 18-month period beginning July 1st, 2020 through December 31st, 2021. We also reviewed child and placement monitoring activities back to calendar year 2017. Our audit objectives were to determine if division processes ensure foster care and other homes housing children in state custody were adequate to ensure the safety and welfare of children and to evaluate controls over certain payments supporting children and youth to ensure payments were accurate and appropriate. On page 7, we begin our findings and recommendations. We found the majority of placements were sufficiently sanitary and safe. However, child placement providers did not always comply with health, safety, and regulatory standards. We inspected 30 licensed and unlicensed placements in all division regions, including 24 licensed foster care and 6 unlicensed placements as depicted in Exhibit 5. Of those inspected, 10 or 33% of placements had health or safety deficiencies. As stated on page 8, we also identified 1 unlicensed placement with unsanitary and bleak living conditions. In this placement, there were sufficiently substandard conditions, and the division promptly transferred the children to a different placement. In placements in which health and safety standards were not maintained, children were potentially exposed to conditions that put their health and safety at risk. Page 9 shows that of the 24 foster homes inspected, 19 or 79% had at least 1 foster care regulatory violation. Regulatory violations included 6 placements that did not properly maintain child medical records, 18 placements that did not maintain a clothing inventory for children, and 1 home lacking a bedroom window screen as showed in Exhibit 6 on the top of page 10. We also found that 4 foster providers did not comply with medication management requirements established in regulation. Foster care providers are required to maintain records detailing provided medication and the date and time administered. Homes evaluated included children on antipsychotic and anti-seizure medications. Without complete medication administration records, there is no documentation verifying children receive medications timely. Continuing on page 10, we note that the division did not have evidence that provider health and safety assessments were completed for some placements housing children in state custody. After conducting reviews of division files for 11 unlicensed placements selected for inspection, we found the division did not have evidence required background checks and home assessments were completed for some providers. As depicted in Exhibit 7 on page 11, there was no evidence of home inspection documentation for 27% and no evidence of background check for 45% of unlicensed placement providers assessed. In addition, some unlicensed emergency placement lacked required division safety assessments, including 29% that lacked emergency placement checklists and 57% that lacked confirming safe environment assessments. Children are exposed to higher risk in unlicensed placements when these required assessments are not completed. On page 12, we also found that the division did not always complete home inspection documentation and ensure that all residents of foster homes received required health assessments. 58%, or 4 out of 24, of foster home inspection documentation was incomplete, including 2 missing inspection checklists, 7 checklists with some inspection criteria not completed, and 10 inspection checklists with missing or incomplete corrective action plans. These findings are summarized in Exhibit 8 on page 13. Additionally, of 24 foster homes, 5 homes, or 21%, did not have a tuberculosis test completed timely for all adults in the home, and 1 foster home resident did not have any tuberculosis test on file. Division files lacked documentation because monitoring and oversight controls were insufficient to ensure all activities were properly documented. We also recognize in the report division management's concerns that significant staff and supervisory shortages and telework challenges related to COVID-19 restrictions impacted their licensing group during the period evaluated. On page 14, we state that improving the process by which the division establishes and manages unlicensed providers would support both caretakers and children placed in these households. The division has not established a written agreement with unlicensed providers who oversee children in state custody, and home inspection procedures for unlicensed providers are brief or poorly defined. Additionally, the division does not provide documentation regarding expected home, health, and safety standards to unlicensed providers. The division, children in state custody, and providers are at increased exposure to preventable risk due to inadequate oversight of unlicensed placements. Division management stated too much regimentation of the process governing unlicensed placements could lead to children being placed outside of familial and fictive kin placements. However, management also stated that a concise unlicensed provider agreement would be reasonable. The division could reduce the risk of harm to children or providers in an unlicensed placement if proper agreements and standards are established. On page 16 through 17, we provide 10 recommendations to improve the division's oversight of in-home providers who care for children in state custody. Continuing on page 18, we found foster care payments were accurately and appropriately administered by the division. We randomly selected 50 fiscal year 2021 foster care payments of 4,068 total claims and found payments were accurately calculated. Payment records in Unity agreed to the state accounting system, and special payments were supported by medical documentation. The division helps support the financial health of foster care providers and the state when it administers accurate and justified foster care payments. To conclude, the report appendices begin on page 19. Appendix A is our audit methodology, and Appendix B is the division's response. As indicated on page 26, the division accepted all 10 recommendations. Chair and members of the Audit Subcommittee, that completes my presentation. I am available to answer any questions.
Members, any questions? Assemblywoman Miller.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for this presentation. As usual, it's quite concerning when we see these numbers and some of the things that haven't been addressed. My question is, I'll focus it primarily on page 11. When we look at the number of home inspections and emergency placement checklists and backgrounds and safe environment assessments that were conducted, do we have a number on how much of this overlaps on the same household that children were placed in? Meaning, so in this one foster situation, is there examples where 2 or 3 or maybe all 4 of these things didn't occur?
Scott Jones, Deputy Legislative Auditor, for the record. So Assemblywoman Miller, there was some overlap, although I don't have that data presented in here and don't have that data at this point, but there was some that were missing both the confirming safe environment analysis as well as the emergency placement checklist.
Follow-up, Chair? My other concern is when it comes to the medication management record keeping, specifically when we're identifying medications that are antipsychotic and anti-seizure medicines, which both are really necessary for our children to live and be successful. And so what were the numbers of households that where this management record keeping wasn't assessed? And what is the reason for this? Is this in an emergency situation, we're just grabbing kids and making sure, next to kin, they have a safe place to sleep that night, and maybe the medication just isn't transferred with them, or maybe we're not sure at that time. I understand in emergencies, it's really about, making sure that the children have a safe place to be tonight. And of course, we may not know about all of their medications and all of that kind of stuff in an emergency situation. So can you maybe just briefly explain the process, if this is just for children that were placed under emergency placements? And if so, is that part of the checklist? When do we find out about their medications? How do we obtain their medications? And also, as you're going through, and I know I'm throwing a lot of questions at you, as you're going through this and we discover that, this record keeping isn't done, often how long is it that children have been without their medication? Like, do we find this within the first week, or are we 6 months down the road and we find out that a child hasn't had their prescribed medication?
Assemblywoman Miller, Scott Jones, Deputy Legislative Auditor for the record. So I wanted to first emphasize with this, this was 4 foster providers that were identified that had not completed the medication administration record. This is not that the children did not receive the medication. So we, during our inspections, would talk to the providers about medications that were administered, and based on our experience, the father didn't have the necessary medication management records that are required to track those medications administered to children, and that's what we provide here and on page 10 as an explanation. And you can let me know if I missed any of your questions.
Follow-up, Chair? So with that, it says that on page 10, it says the providers assessed did not comply with medication management requirements established in regulation. So that did bring a little bit of clarity that this isn't something that was overlooked or missed by the agency, but then what it does portray is that the home providers, the foster parents, were not filling out the form. And if they're not filling out the form, then how do we know whether or not the children are getting the medications that they need? Children are getting the medications that they need.
Scott Jones, Deputy Legislative Auditor for the record. Assemblywoman Miller, so this was a responsibility of the foster home provider to fill out a form like this, although it also is a responsibility of the division and the licensing workers to verify that these are indeed being completed.
Follow-up, Chair? So to verify, what's the expectation for them to be completed? I would imagine this would be on the emergency checklist. I mean, I'm trying to give the scenario where we would provide the most grace. You know, we know that we need someplace for these children to be tonight, right? So next to kin, you know, that can take them in. Again, we understand there's times where children are being you know, transferred and they literally with just the clothes on their back. So even in the most emergency immediate situation where we would provide the most grace and understanding, still, what is the expectation for when this report should be completed?
Scott Jones, Deputy Legislative Auditor for the record, to Assemblywoman Miller. So in regulation, it outlines that when this medication is administered to the child, they need to document the dosage, the frequency, the time it was administered, the type of medication, and the division has a specific form that's available to the providers to complete to verify things like antipsychotic and anti-seizure medications. And so the inspections that we did were for established foster providers that had children in the home. So in the previous section, we talked about emergency placements and emergency placement checklists. Those sections were specific to unlicensed placements, while this section is for foster providers that you know, have had training and have access to resources and division oversight.
So that makes it even worse, in my opinion, because these are situations where they should know better and they've had the training. I'm fine. Thank you, Chair. Thank you.
Senator Hammond?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And so my line of question is kind of it's going to be the same sort of line as what you just heard from the Assemblywoman. I imagine, this is the way I see it, that to become a foster parent, you get a checklist of things that you need to do. Of course, the agency makes sure that people are complying. You guys go in and find out that there is some compliance issues. For example, I think you gave one with the medication. The other one was on the parents themselves, the family members in the home. They have to get certain shots to be vaccinated against certain diseases, and so you found out that some of them weren't complying with that. I guess my question would be, you discover that in your audit. How often are we getting inspectors in to look at what's going on in the homes when they discover something is amiss? They're not making sure there's an inventory for clothing and that there's not a shot being received by family members or whatever it might be. How often are they going into the home after they discover it in order to make sure that they do come under compliance as quickly as possible? I guess that's my question is, how often are we getting inspectors into making sure that when a checklist of things that should be being done by foster families that they come into compliance, and how often does that happen?
Scott Jones, Deputy Legislative Auditor for the record, to Senator Hammond. So there is an annual licensing inspection that takes place, as well as preliminary inspections before they get approved. And then there's a recertification as outlined on Exhibit 3, where foster home gets recertified. There's also caseworkers that are coming into the home at least every other month and having contact with the child every month. And the division can comment more on this to provide clarification, but as part of the inspection process that they do on an annual basis, there is a checklist that is completed, and there is a section for corrective action that needs to take place. And then that is, by policy supposed to be documented and followed up until the whatever exception that's identified is corrected.
Yeah, thank you. And a follow-up, Madam Chair. So I probably should save this question for the agency when we get a chance to talk to them. So when they do their yearly inspection, then they come up with a list of items that need to be corrected, and then the caseworker goes in. Is it the policy of the agency to then have the caseworker update, check, verify that list that was created and their annual licensing or relicensing? I guess I should, if you can answer that, that's fine. But if you would rather save that, and I can ask that of the agency, I might do that as well.
Scott Jones, Deputy Legislative Auditor for the record, to Senator Hammond. So they do have within that inspection document a place in which they can document when they come into compliance. And we did review records that did show that process where, in policy, they go all the way from identifying corrective action to the licensing worker, then documenting the date that the corrective action was completed, and they can, sign off on that to ensure that that is completed.
Thank you. That's exactly what I was looking for. Just wanted to make sure I understood the process better. Thank you.
Assemblymember Dickman, any questions?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you. So my question is just, it's like all the other agencies. This division has a vacancy rate of 25%. So the deficiencies that you're finding, how much of that do you think is attributable, the lack of inspections and things like that, to this deficiency? And did they indicate that they were going to be filling any of these positions anytime soon?
Scott Jones, Deputy Legislative Auditor for the record, to Assemblywoman Dickman. So we did have discussions with them, and in the report we have a section that documents that they had challenges with hiring and staffing for their licensing group during the period that we assessed. So that was definitely a challenge that they identified that affected the ability of the licensing group. And so that's a challenge that they stated was in place. Now, we also recognize the vacancy rate that we published within the article. They would be able to comment better on their staffing for that group and the current state of that.
Thank you. And thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And I have a couple of questions, and it probably comes from my unfamiliarity with this division, but I know that you had mentioned that there was 11 unlicensed placements, and so the facilities are unlicensed. How long is a facility allowed to be unlicensed, or are they always an unlicensed facility, or are they required to obtain a license after a certain point? They're just, like Assemblymember Miller said, they might be an emergency placement, so that placement is an unlicensed resident because they hadn't been registered with the state before.
Scott Jones, Deputy Legislative Auditor for the record, to the Chair. An unlicensed placement is not required to become a licensed placement. And we talk about this a little bit in the report, that the goal of the placement of the child is to be in the most supportive, least restrictive placement that's possible. And so the division will work to place the child, and even according to state law, that they want to place that in the best environment possible. And so in certain cases that could be with family or fictive kin that are not formally licensed, and they can stay with that child for as long as that provider's willing to watch that child. Although the division does make it a goal to support making those providers licensed so that they can get access to additional resources and funding. Although in some cases those providers want to remain unlicensed, and so they stay unlicensed.
Okay, but in the report said that the 5 of the 11 unlicensed placements lacked a background check. So there is some sort of checks on these placements, right? So they take an emergency situation, they might take someone, place it with the next of kin, but they are required to do a check to make sure that this is a suitable placement for this child, like a background check, correct?
Scott Jones, Deputy Legislative Auditor, for the record, to the chair. So as it shows on Exhibit 3, they have a home inspection that takes place and background check of the adult residents that is required as part of that process of placing the child.
And for the 5 unlicensed placements that didn't have a background check, would you know if a background check was completed shortly after that discovery?
Scott Jones, Deputy Legislative Auditor, for the record, to the chair. So we looked to see if that background check was completed with record. We also reached out to the agency to inquire about that. And during that time of the audit that we looked into it, we didn't see any evidence that they had been completed. It's possible that they were completed since we have, concluded our paperwork on it. So the division can state if they have done subsequent analysis of that.
Okay, thank you. I'll save that question for the division because I'd like to know if the children are still in those homes and if a background check has been completed. I think that was all the questions I had for you. Thank you so much, Mr. Jones. And if we have someone for the division here, if you could come to the podium so we could ask some questions. I think I might be the only one left with one, so.
Hi, Madam Chair. For the record, my name is Cindy Pitlock, and I serve as the Administrator of the Division of Child and Family Services. And I just wanted to note that it was an absolute pleasure to work with the LCB auditors. And I have with me Lori Jackson, who is my Social Services Chief 5, that can answer your in-detail questions. So I would defer to her for some of that programmatic questions. But if you have anything for me specifically, I'm here certainly to support.
Thank you, Ms. Pitlock. And Ms. Jackson, I just had the one question. I know that in the auditor's evaluation, they found that 5 of the 11 unlicensed placements hadn't received background checks, and I just wanted to see if that had been corrected. Are the children still in those homes, and have those background checks been performed?
Thank you, Madam Chair. Lori Jackson, for the record. Those background checks were performed. 2 of the 5 were performed through law enforcement at the time of the emergency placement. We have the ability to do that with them. And the others were subsequently performed the day or so after, but the documentation that shows that that was done was not in the file.
Okay, perfect. So they had been done, they just weren't available for our auditor to see.
Yes, ma'am. Lori Jackson, for the record.
Thank you, Ms. Jackson. Members, do you have any questions for the division while we have them at the podium? Jill? I'm sorry, Assemblymember Dickman.
Thank you, ma'am. Just a quick question about that vacancy rate. Is it still at 25%? Do you see any improvements happening?
Thank you for the question. For the record, Cindy Pitlock. So our vacancy rate is hovering right around 33 to 36% right now, and we are doing everything that we can to be creative in getting to yes with potential employees, including relocating positions, part-time, telecommuting, blending, everything that we can possibly think of. So yes, the answer is yes. We still have at least that high of a vacancy rate that you were quoted, but we are certainly working with Durham and with our HR department, with other divisions within our own department to utilize our resources as best we can to take care of the most acute situations and triage in that manner. And hopefully someday there will be light at the end of our tunnel, and that light will be more people to help perform services for the state. So yes.
Yeah, it certainly is a challenge, and in this group of our residents, it's kind of scary to have such shortages. But I appreciate all your efforts. Thank you, and thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Ms. Pitlock and Ms. Jackson, and thank you, Mr. Jones and Ms. Getz. I think those are all the questions, and so I will take a motion to approve the audit report. I have a first by Assemblymember Miller, a second by Senator Hammond. Any discussion on the motion? Okay, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Our next agenda item is agenda item 4B, which is the review of the audit of the Nevada State Board of Medical Examiners. We have Audit Supervisor Tammy Getz here and Deputy Legislative Auditor Amanda Barlow here to present the audit report.
Good afternoon, Chair and members of the Audit Subcommittee. For the record, my name is Tammy Getz, Audit Supervisor. Today I will be presenting the performance audit of the Nevada State Board of Medical Examiners. This audit was requested by the Legislative Commission after concerns were raised regarding the timeliness of licensing, investigations, and the purchase of an office building. If I could please direct your attention to page 1, I will begin with some background information. The Nevada State Board of Medical Examiners is an independent regulating body that was established in 1899. The board determines the competence of medical providers, including physicians, perfusionists, physician assistants, and practitioners of respiratory care. The board has offices in Reno and Las Vegas with 38 total staff as of February 2021. The board is self-funded primarily from license and registration fees. Exhibit 1 on page 2 shows that the board had total revenues of $5.3 million and expenditures of $4.9 million in calendar year 2020. As stated on pages 2 through 5, board operations are comprised of 5 divisions: licensing, investigations, legal, finance, and administration. As indicated on page 3 in Exhibit 2, the board had 13,317 active licensees as of the end of calendar year 2020. Exhibit 3 highlights the number of licenses issued from calendar years 2016 to 2020. On page 5, we describe the board's investigative and formal disciplinary processes. The investigative process begins when a complaint is filed against a medical provider licensed by the board. A complaint can range from unfounded allegations to possible criminal violations. Jurisdiction must be established when a complaint is received. To establish jurisdiction, the complaint must be against a board licensee, and alleged conduct constitutes a violation of the Medical Practice Act. Complaints for which the board has no jurisdiction are closed or referred to the appropriate agency for further review. In order to discipline a licensee, a complaint must be substantiated through an investigation. The board can pursue disciplinary action against a medical provider when complaints are substantiated. Exhibit 4 on page 4 shows types of disciplinary actions, and Exhibit 5 on page 6 outlines the investigative and formal disciplinary processes. On page 7, we describe our audit scope and objectives. The scope of our audit included a review of the board activities for calendar years 2019 and 2020, and from 2016 for certain investigative cases, from 2017 for workload trends, and from 2008 for reserve balance analysis. Our audit objectives were to evaluate the board's processes for licensing physicians and investigating complaints, and evaluate the board's process for purchasing an office building. On page 8, we begin our findings chapters. Overall, we found opportunities for improvements to the board's investigative and disciplinary processes. The board can improve the monitoring of its complaint resolution process, which can take as long as several years to finalize. Large gaps of time existed between activities in certain cases where the board could not provide explanations for delays. Timely resolution of cases is important for ensuring practicing physicians are competent and patients are safe from harm. We tested 40 investigative and 20 legal cases from 2019 and 2020 and found the investigative process took an average of 326 days. As stated on page 9, there are opportunities for the board to eliminate delays. We found it took an average of 23 days for a complaint to be reviewed and assigned to an investigator. 5 cases took significantly longer, up to 68 days. Management stated the intake turnaround goal is 7 days. Investigators took 31 days to review complaints, notify licensees they were under investigation, and request medical records if needed. 7 cases took significantly longer, up to 134 days. The disciplinary process, when applicable, took over a year to resolve. Our review of cases showed little documentation existed detailing board activities, if any, during this time period. On pages 10 and 11, we noted opportunities for improvements to the timeliness of the investigative committee practices hearing cases, the record keeping associated with fingerprint records of licensees when reviewing potential disciplinary matters, and notification of complainants of a formal complaint during the disciplinary process. On page 12, we explained that enhancing the process of assessing fines in disciplinary matters could help ensure equity. The legal division recommends discipline for violators, which include penalties such as monetary fines, continuing medical education, public reprimands, and license suspension or revocation. The board has discretion by statute in making the final disciplinary determinations and utilizes judgment and licensee history in this process. However, the division has not established disciplinary guidelines or schedules that recommend penalties based on specific violations. We found such guidelines to be a best practice in our conversations with other states. For 18 legal cases we reviewed, only 7 cases were assessed fines, even though all of the violations in the remaining 11 cases were eligible. Exhibit 6 on page 13 shows the variations in assessed fines and the related violations cited. We do note that sanctions of some sort were brought against all cases tested. At the bottom of the page, we state that the board assessed licensees for the cost of investigations. However, these costs were not always adequately supported to determine whether the amount assessed was accurate. State law allows the board to recover investigation and disciplinary costs from the licensee as long as an itemized statement of fees is provided to support fees assessed. The board recovered about $70,000 in investigation fees in 18 cases closed during calendar years 2019 and 2020. Itemized statements did not support cost recovery amounts in 2 of the 18 cases with cost recoveries. Even though the board's operational manual states staff should be able to provide an accounting for their hours, documentation to support hours charged also did not exist. As a result, hours charged did not always appear to be appropriate. As shown in Exhibit 7 on page 15, the hours assessed to licensees did not necessarily correlate to the length of time necessary to close a case. Continuing at the bottom of the page, for 17 of 18 cases reviewed, documentation supporting fees charged was inadequate to verify amounts charged to licensees. As a result, we could not determine the accuracy of costs assessed and recovered by the board. Additionally, invoices paid to external peer reviewers did not always include detail for the hours worked to determine the reasonableness of the charge. Assessing and recovering accurate investigative and disciplinary costs is important for ensuring fair and equitable treatment of licensees. On page 16, we list 10 recommendations to improve controls over investigative and disciplinary processes, including complaint intake, fines, and cost recoveries. Throughout the report, we highlighted in various instances where the board took prompt actions to remedy or enhance processes or policies during the course of the audit, as we brought concerns to their attention. The next chapter of the report begins on page 17. We found certain board activities were sufficiently performed. The board processed applications efficiently with nearly 75% of the time to issue a license attributed to applicants obtaining the proper documentation to allow the division to process the application. We reviewed the licensing process for 50 applications and found it took the board an average of 98 days to complete the licensing process. But the majority of those days were related to applicants and third parties gathering required information. Exhibit 8 shows the average time for the board to issue a license. On page 19, we describe that disciplinary information on the board's website and the National Practitioner Data Bank was accurate for all cases reviewed. State law requires the board's website to include a list of each licensee and a brief description of any disciplinary actions. This information allows individuals to make informed decisions when choosing healthcare providers. In the middle of the page, we state that the board management performed sufficient analysis prior to purchasing a Reno office building in 2018 for $3.4 million. We reviewed documentation provided by management to determine whether quality information was used to make an informed decision regarding this purchase. We found the rationale and calculation used to estimate the need for increased office space was reasonable. In addition, relevant cost and benefit information was obtained. Financial information was provided to board members at public meetings when the building purchase was discussed, and the related effect the purchase would have on the board's cash reserves. The board's reserves balance from 2010 to 2020 is shown in Exhibit 9 on page 20. To conclude, page 21, Appendix A, describes our audit methodology, and Appendix B, beginning on page 25, contains the board's response. We would note that the board's response includes various correction actions that the agency has already taken. As indicated on page 33, the board accepted all 10 audit recommendations. Chair and members of the Audit Subcommittee, that completes my presentation. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Ms. Getz. Members, questions? Assemblymember Dickman, do you have any questions?
I do not, thank you.
Okay. I have some questions, just a couple, but I just want to ask quickly, I want to go to page 13, Exhibit 6. Of the 18 cases, were you able to collect any demographic information, Ms. Getz, regarding the cases that were fined? Where my concern is when you have 3 cases with the exact same violation description, but only one was charged a fine, and then we see it again in case 8 and 9, and then also in case 13 and 14. So do you know if there was any demographic information that they were able to collect?
Chair, for the record, this is Tammy Getz, Audit Supervisor. We do have demographic information on these. We can provide that to you. I don't have that readily available, but we can get that to you, most certainly.
If you could distribute it just to the entire committee so that everyone has the information. Okay, and then. And I didn't see it in the response, but and I might have just overlooked it, but did the board already start implementing a tracking system for complaints? I can't imagine being a practitioner, a doctor, and having a complaint filed against me and not ever being notified by the board. So I'm practicing not being aware that there has been a formal complaint filed against me. Do you know if the board, since the audit was performed, has started implementing a process by which they can track the notifications that are sent to physicians?
Chair, for the record, this is Tammy Getz, Audit Supervisor. Yes, the board has implemented, they do have a system, and they've actually enhanced that system based on our recommendation to start tracking that.
Okay, perfect. And then my last question, Ms. Getz, on page 8, you referenced some numbers about, testing 40 investigative and 20 legal cases from 2019 and 2020. Do you know how many cases they had in total, though? So our sample size was about 60 for the 2 years, but do you know how many cases they had in total between 2019 and 2020 for investigative and legal cases?
Chair, this is Tammy Getz, Audit Supervisor. On page 22 is the methodology for the procedures we performed. And at the very bottom of that page, we indicate that the population was 924 for those 2 calendar years.
Thank you, Ms. Getz. I appreciate that. I see that now. Okay, members, any other questions? Okay, Ms. Getz, thank you so much. We appreciate it. And members, do you have any questions for the board? Okay, seeing none, then I would accept a motion to approve the audit report. I have a first by Assemblymember Miller, a second by Senator Hammond. Do we have any discussion on the motion? Seeing none, all those in favor, please signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed? Motion carries unanimously. Thank you. Okay, members, the next item on our agenda is our last item, is public comment. Is there anyone in Las Vegas wishing to give public comment? Is there anyone in Carson City wishing to give public comment? Okay, BPS, would you please check the telephone line for anyone wishing to provide public comment?
Chair, the public line is open and working. However, there are no callers at this time.
Thank you so much. Okay, with that, committee, we are done with our agenda items. I want to thank you and thank our audit staff for all the work they did in preparing the materials for today, especially for agenda item 5. Thank you for all of the work you do, and thank you to members for paying attention for the entire length of the meeting. I appreciate you. And with that, we are adjourned.